Listen closely. Can you hear it? The rhythmic crash of waves against a forgotten shore, the whisper of the wind over endless, empty horizons. This is the sound of history's greatest mysteries, a symphony of secrets that the ocean has guarded for thousands of years. What incredible stories are locked away in the deep, stories of human courage and staggering ambition that simply vanished, swallowed by the sea and erased by time. For as long as we have looked upon the water, we have been drawn to its vast, unknowable depths, a frontier that has both given life and taken it without a trace. We are about to set sail on a journey into that very mystery, a voyage back through the ages to a time when the map was mostly blank and the courage of explorers was measured by how far they were willing to sail from the safety of the known world. These ancient mariners, armed with little more than wooden ships, the stars, and an unshakable will, challenged the greatest force on our planet. Some returned with tales that defined empires, while others simply disappeared, leaving behind only whispers, legends, and questions that have haunted us for centuries. This isn't just a recounting of old sailors' yarns. This is an exploration of the human spirit itself, our relentless drive to see what lies beyond the horizon, no matter the cost. We are connected to these lost souls by that same spark of curiosity, that same yearning for discovery that compels us to look up at the stars and wonder what's out there. They looked across the water with that same feeling, pushing into a blue abyss filled with as much terror as wonder. Their stories are epic sagas of perseverance, of kingdoms that may have risen and fallen without any witness, and of voyages so ambitious that their very existence teeters on the edge of myth. We will be their witnesses now. In this video, we will uncover 25 of the most intriguing legends of ancient sea voyages and the lost explorers who dared to dream bigger than their world. We will follow the ghostly wakes of Phoenician traders who might have circumnavigated Africa, trace the potential routes of Chinese treasure fleets that could have reached the Americas, and search for evidence of sophisticated civilizations that mastered the oceans long before our history books say it was possible. Each tale is a piece of a grand, unsolved puzzle, a fragment of our collective past waiting to be understood. So prepare to be transported. Let the sound of the waves pull you in and allow your imagination to fill the sails of these legendary ships. What you are about to hear will challenge what you thought you knew about history, about exploration, and about the incredible, often tragic, lengths humans will go to in order to answer that most fundamental of calls, the call of the unknown. Our journey begins not with a single ship or a lone explorer, but with an entire world that supposedly vanished. Imagine a vast continent, larger than Australia, resting in the heart of the Pacific Ocean. A place of gentle climate and towering, crystal-topped cities, inhabited by a race of millions who had mastered energies and technologies we can scarcely comprehend. This is the legend of Mu, the motherland of all humanity, said to have been swallowed by the sea in a single catastrophic day and night of fire and earthquakes. The story of Mu first surfaced not in ancient texts but in the 19th century through the work of a fascinating and controversial figure named Augustus Le Plongeon. He was an antiquarian and early Mayanist who, while studying the ruins in Yucatan, became convinced he had decoded a story within the intricate carvings. He believed he was reading an account of an even older civilization than the Maya or the Egyptians, a civilization he called Mu. He postulated that this lost continent was the original source of all ancient knowledge, and that its survivors had founded the great cultures of Egypt and Mesoamerica. But the man who truly popularized Mu and built an entire mythology around it was James Churchward, a British occult writer in the early 20th century. Churchward claimed that during his time in India, a high priest of a secret temple had shown him a collection of ancient clay tablets written in the original language of mankind, the language of Mu. These tablets, which he called the Knockle Tablets, supposedly detailed the entire history, science, and theology of this advanced society. According to Churchward's vivid descriptions, the people of Mu were the Nagas, a superior race who did not need to till the soil as the earth provided food in abundance. Their civilization was a global empire, the Empire of the Sun, with 64 million inhabitants and 7 great cities. They possessed knowledge that allowed them to harness cosmic forces and build structures that defied time. Their society was peaceful, spiritual, and immensely powerful. So, what became of this paradise? The legend tells of a devastating cataclysm. Churchward described how vast subterranean gas chambers collapsed, causing the entire continent to shudder and sink. Volcanoes erupted, tidal waves scoured the land, and the great cities of Mu were dragged beneath the waves, leaving only the peaks of the highest mountains, which we know today as the scattered islands of the Pacific. This narrative was compelling, a story of a golden age lost to human folly or cosmic indifference. For decades, believers and researchers have proposed locations for Mu, from a sunken land bridge between South America and Polynesia to a massive, now submerged plateau around Micronesia. The idea captured the public imagination, offering a romantic explanation for the similarities between disparate ancient cultures, suggesting they were all scattered seeds from the same lost root. However, when we hold the legend of Mu against the cold, hard light of modern geology, it begins to dissolve like a mirage. Plate tectonics provides a comprehensive explanation for the formation of our continents and ocean floors. The Pacific Ocean Basin is not a graveyard for a recent continent. It is composed primarily of dense basaltic rock, fundamentally different from the lighter granitic rock that makes up our continents. There is no geological evidence of a massive continental plate having sunk there in the time frame of human civilization. Furthermore, the story of the Knockle tablets has never been substantiated. No other scholar has ever seen them, and most archaeologists dismiss Le Plongeon's translations as pure fantasy, a product of his own vivid imagination projected onto the complex Mayan script. So why does the legend of Mu persist with such power? Perhaps because it speaks to a deep, almost primal human fear and fascination with the idea of a great forgetting. It embodies the notion that we are not the pinnacle of human achievement, but merely the survivors of a greater world living in its shadow. It is a haunting echo of the Atlantis story, transposed to a new ocean, fulfilling the same need for a foundational myth of a fall from grace, a lost paradise beneath the waves. Yet for all the romantic allure of a lost Pacific continent, there is one sunken kingdom that utterly dwarfs all others in our collective imagination, a name that has become synonymous with the very idea of a vanished world, Atlantis. Unlike the relatively modern legend of Mu, the story of Atlantis comes to us from the very bedrock of Western philosophy, from the dialogues of the ancient Greek thinker Plato. In his works Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BCE, Plato doesn't present Atlantis as a myth, but as a historical reality, a tale passed down to his ancestor, Solon, by Egyptian priests who claim to possess records going back 9,000 years. According to these priests, a formidable naval power existed beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we know today as the Strait of Gibraltar. This was Atlantis, an island kingdom larger than Libya and Asia Minor combined. Plato describes it in breathtaking detail, a concentric series of land and water rings with a majestic capital city at its heart, built from exotic stones like red, black, and white rock, and even a mysterious glowing metal called orichalcum. The Atlanteans were a people of immense wealth and sophistication, with a complex society, advanced engineering, and a powerful army and navy that allowed them to dominate the Western Mediterranean. Their downfall, according to the story, was one of hubris. After a failed attempt to conquer the city of ancient Athens, the gods grew angry with the Atlanteans' growing corruption and imperial ambition. And then, in one terrible day and night of catastrophic earthquakes and floods, the entire island was swallowed by the sea, disappearing forever into the depths. This is the core of the legend, a powerful moral fable about the dangers of a civilization overreaching its moral bounds. But here is the central, tantalizing mystery. Was Plato crafting a philosophical allegory to illustrate his ideas about the ideal state and its potential for decay? Or was he recording a garbled memory of a real historical catastrophe? This single question has launched 1,000 ships, both literal and metaphorical, in a search that has spanned millennia. The theories for Atlantis's location are as vast and deep as the ocean itself. Some researchers, taking Plato's description literally, have searched the Atlantic Ocean, pointing to underwater formations like the Azores Plateau as a potential candidate. Others argue it was a metaphor for the Minoan civilization on the island of Thera, modern-day Santorini, which was indeed obliterated by a colossal volcanic eruption around 1600 BCE, a disaster so immense it likely inspired flood myths across the region. There are theories placing Atlantis in the Mediterranean, near Cyprus or Malta, or even identifying it with the rich Tartessos culture of southern Spain. More fringe suggestions have placed the lost city in the Caribbean, linking it to the Bermuda Triangle or even in Antarctica, suggesting a shift in the Earth's crust moved it to its current frozen location. The sheer diversity of these theories speaks to the power of the story. It acts as a blank canvas onto which we can project our own ideas about a golden age, a catastrophic end, and the enduring human hope that evidence of a magnificent past still lies hidden, waiting to be discovered. The legend of Atlantis endures not because we have found it, but because we are still looking. It represents the ultimate historical puzzle, a ghost in the machine of our understanding of the ancient world, forever challenging us to question what we know about the rise and fall of civilizations. But while philosophers dreamed of sunken continents on the other side of the world, a real-world fleet of unimaginable scale was making fantasy seem mundane. In the early 15th century, while European ships were still cautiously hugging coastlines, the Ming dynasty of China launched a project of maritime exploration that would not be rivaled for centuries. At the command of this colossal treasure fleet was a remarkable man, Admiral Zheng He, a Muslim eunuch who stood, according to some accounts, nearly 7 feet tall. Zheng He was a figure of immense presence and capability, trusted implicitly by the Yongle Emperor. His mission was not conquest, but something far more ambitious, to project the majesty and power of the Ming court across the known world, establishing a vast network of tribute and trade that stretched from Southeast Asia to the very edge of Africa. Between the years 1405 and 1433, Admiral Zheng He commanded 7 epic voyages, each one a staggering logistical feat. The fleet itself was a floating city. Historical records describe massive treasure ships that stretched over 400 feet long, dwarfing the tiny vessels Columbus would sail nearly a century later. These were 9-masted leviathans with multiple decks, luxurious cabins, and even vegetable gardens grown on board. They were accompanied by hundreds of smaller support vessels carrying everything from troops and cavalry to fresh water and trade goods, forming an armada of sometimes over 300 ships and 27,000 men. The sheer organizational power required to build, supply, and navigate such a fleet is almost incomprehensible. Zheng He's voyages took him across the Indian Ocean to the bustling ports of Vietnam and Java, through the Strait of Malacca and onto India, the Arabian Peninsula, and down the East African coast as far as modern-day Kenya. In these distant lands, the fleet's arrival was a spectacle of awe. They exchanged Chinese silk, porcelain, and tea for exotic gifts like giraffes, zebras, and other rare animals, which were brought back to the imperial court as living proof of the world's wonders. These were diplomatic missions of unparalleled grandeur, designed to create a Chinese-led world order built on respect and commercial exchange. They successfully established a web of relationships that brought dozens of kingdoms into China's orbit, creating a period of immense Chinese influence across half the globe. And then it all just stopped. Following the seventh voyage and a shift in imperial power, the entire endeavor was abruptly terminated. The motivation for this sudden reversal is one of history's great turning points. A new faction within the court, arguing that the voyages were a wasteful extravagance, gained the emperor's ear. They saw the immense cost of building and maintaining the treasure fleet as a drain on the treasury, especially with growing threats from Mongol tribes along the northern land borders. In a decision that would alter the course of global history, the court ordered the voyages halted, the ships left to decay in their harbors, and most shockingly many of the official records and logs of Zheng He's achievements to be deliberately destroyed. It was an act of historical self-censorship, an attempt to erase this grand era of maritime ambition from the national memory. The implications of this decision are staggering to consider. With the treasure fleet dismantled and its knowledge suppressed, China voluntarily withdrew from the world stage just as Europe was beginning its own age of exploration. Had the voyages continued, it is entirely plausible that Chinese ships, not Portuguese or Spanish ones, would have been the first to round the Cape of Good Hope, cross the Atlantic, or even circumnavigate the globe. The map of the modern world, the distribution of power, and the very language of international trade could have been profoundly different. The mystery of Zheng He's abandoned fleet is not a question of what was lost at sea, but what was lost by a single, fateful decision on land, a choice that closed a window to a future that never was, leaving us only with the ghost of those magnificent ships and a haunting question of what might have been. But if the story of Zheng He is one of a path not taken, our next legend shows us a path that was taken, a journey that definitively reached the shores of the Americas, centuries before Columbus ever set sail. We travel now from the warm waters of the Indian Ocean to the frigid, iceberg-choked seas of the North Atlantic, to the world of the Vikings. Theirs was a culture born of the sea, and their stories of exploration were not philosophical allegories, but gritty, detailed family sagas passed down through generations. Two of these, the Greenlander's Saga and Eric the Red Saga, contain one of history's most incredible travelogues, the discovery of a new world. The context for this discovery was the relentless westward expansion of the Norse. From their Scandinavian homelands, they had settled Iceland. Then, around the year 982, the fiery-tempered Eric the Red, exiled for murder, discovered and named Greenland, establishing a settlement on its rugged coast. It was from this remote outpost that the next great leap would be made. The sagas tell us that around the year 1000, a merchant named Bjarni Herjolfsson was blown off course while sailing from Iceland to Greenland. Through the mist and spray, he spotted a wooded land to the west, a coastline that was clearly not Greenland. Though he did not land, his report of this unknown shore sparked the curiosity of Leif Erikson, the son of Eric the Red. Leif purchased Bjarni's ship, gathered a crew of 35, and set out to find this mysterious land. His journey south and west revealed a stunning geographical progression. First, he found a barren, flat land of slate rock, which he named Helluland, meaning land of the flat stones. This is almost certainly what we know today as Baffin Island in Canada. Sailing further, he came upon a coast with white sandy beaches and dense forests, which he named Markland, or Forest Land, widely believed to be the Labrador coast of Canada. But it was the next landing that would become the stuff of legend. The sagas describe a place so temperate that dew on the grass tasted as sweet as wine, where wild grapes grew in abundance and the rivers teemed with salmon. Leif named this fertile country Vinland, which has often been translated as Wineland. He and his crew built sturdy turf-walled longhouses and spent a winter there before returning to Greenland with a cargo of timber and grapes, treasures in the resource-poor Greenland settlements. The stories did not end with Leif. Other voyages followed, including one led by Thorfinn Karlsefni, who attempted to establish a permanent colony. It was during this venture that the Norse encountered the people they called the Skraelings. The term is vague, likely a catch-all for the indigenous peoples they met, probably the Beothuk or the Dorset and Thule cultures. The sagas describe these encounters with a mix of curiosity and tension. Initial trading Norse cloth and dairy products for animal pelts soon gave way to conflict. The Norse, with their metal weapons and chainmail, were formidable, but they were vastly outnumbered. The sagas recount fierce battles, mentioning the use of a fearsome war machine by the Skraelings, which some interpret as a catapult, but which was more likely a simple but effective volley of stones and spears. Faced with constant hostility and the sheer logistical difficulty of sustaining a small settlement so far from their support base in Greenland, the Norse eventually abandoned Vinland. The dream of a permanent foothold in North America faded, and the Greenland settlements themselves would later dwindle and vanish, leaving the Vinland Voyages as a spectacular, isolated episode. For centuries, the Vinland sagas were considered just that, sagas, heroic stories with a kernel of truth but largely mythological. That all changed in the 1960s when a Norwegian explorer, Helge Ingstad, and his archaeologist wife, Anne Stein Ingstad, acting on a meticulous study of the saga descriptions, began investigating a site at the northern tip of Newfoundland called Elance Ox Meadows. What they unearthed was a sensation, the unmistakable remains of a Norse settlement. They found the foundations of 8 turf-built structures, identical in design to those found in Iceland and Greenland, including a longhouse, a smithy, and various workshops. The archaeological evidence was conclusive: slag from ironworking, a bronze pin of Norse design, and carbon dating that placed the occupation firmly around the year 1000. Elance Ox Meadows is now an UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it stands as the first and only confirmed Norse site in North America. It proved beyond any doubt that the Vikings had indeed reached the New World. But this incredible discovery also raised new, tantalizing questions. Elance Ox Meadows itself, situated in a subarctic environment, does not match the saga's description of a land where wild grapes grew. This has led to one of the most enduring mysteries of the Vinland story. How far south did the Vikings truly travel? The settlement at Elance Ox Meadows is now widely believed to have been not the main Vinland colony, but a strategic base camp, a winter stopover and repair station for expeditions venturing further south. If grapes were the key indicator, then the Vikings must have sailed at least as far south as the Gulf of St. Lawrence, where wild grapes do grow, or possibly even to New Brunswick or Nova Scotia. Some more speculative theories, based on controversial interpretations of runestones and vague map references, have even suggested voyages as far south as present-day New England or Rhode Island. While these lack solid archaeological proof, they highlight the compelling possibility that Norse exploration of the Americas was far more extensive than a single landing. The legacy of the Vinland Voyages is a profound one. They represent a fleeting moment of contact between the old world and the new, a connection that was made and then lost for 500 years. It was a road that opened only to be swallowed by the forests of time, leaving behind a handful of ruins, a collection of epic stories, and an undeniable truth that the world was a much more connected place far earlier than we ever imagined. But for every story of ancient voyages and lost continents, there are modern-era mysteries that are, in their own way, just as profound and chilling. Few tales capture the sheer, unnerving quality of the unknown quite like that of the Mary Celeste. It's a story that has transcended its historical facts to become a true archetype, a ghost story for the rational age. Our scene opens in the cold, vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean on a calm afternoon in early December 1872. The British merchant brigantine, the Dei Gratia, was on a routine voyage from New York to Gibraltar. Her captain, David Morehouse, spotted another ship about 6 miles off, and something was immediately wrong. The vessel was under sail, but her movements were erratic, yawing and drifting with the wind. through his spyglass, Morehouse could see no one at the helm. He recognized the ship. It was the Mary Celeste, which had left New York just a few days before his own vessel. He knew her captain, Benjamin Briggs, to be a capable and experienced seaman. Concerned, Morehouse ordered a boarding party to investigate. What they found when they climbed aboard would become the stuff of enduring legend. The Mary Celeste was a ghost ship in the most literal sense. She was perfectly seaworthy, her hull sound and her cargo, 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol, largely intact. Her sails were set, though some were frayed, and the ship was taking on a small amount of water, though not nearly enough to be a dire threat. It was the atmosphere of abrupt, total abandonment that was so deeply unsettling. In the galley, the boarding party discovered the remnants of a meal set out but never finished. In the crew's quarters, personal belongings like oilskins and tobacco pipes were left behind, as if their owners had simply stepped away for a moment. The ship's clock was stopped and the compass was destroyed. Most tellingly, the single lifeboat was gone, carefully launched from its davits, suggesting a deliberate, if panicked, evacuation. The ship's logbook was found, with the last entry dated 10 days prior, placing the ship hundreds of miles from its current position and recording nothing more alarming than routine weather. Captain Briggs, his wife, their 2-year-old daughter, and the entire crew of 7 had vanished without a trace. They were never seen or heard from again. The immediate question, the one that has echoed for a century and a half, is what could have compelled a seasoned captain to abandon a perfectly sound ship with his entire family into a small lifeboat in the middle of the ocean. The official inquiry at the time was inconclusive, and in the vacuum of fact, 1,000 theories have bloomed. One of the most popular and sensational was the idea of a pirate attack or mutiny. Yet this theory quickly falls apart under scrutiny. There was no sign of a struggle, no bloodstains, and no evidence of violence anywhere on the ship. More importantly, the crew's personal valuables were still in their quarters, and the valuable cargo of alcohol was untouched. Pirates or mutineers would have certainly taken anything of value. Another theory points to a natural phenomenon, perhaps a waterspout or a small, localized seaquake. The idea is that the ship may have been shaken violently, leading the crew to believe it was taking on water rapidly and was about to sink. This could explain why they abandoned ship in such a hurry. While plausible, it doesn't fully account for the specific details. The Mary Celeste was still sailing smoothly when found, and the amount of water in the bilge was minimal. A more scientific, and therefore more popular explanation in modern times, involves the cargo itself. The 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol were being shipped for industrial use. The theory suggests that some of the barrels leaked, filling the hold with flammable vapor. Perhaps a spark, or even just the buildup of pressure, caused a violent but non-destructive explosion. A sort of airburst that would have been terrifying and loud enough to convince Captain Briggs that the entire ship was about to blow. He might have ordered everyone into the lifeboat as a temporary safety measure, tethering it to the Mary Celeste with a rope. Then, the most tragic of scenarios, the rope snapped or was deliberately cut in the panic. The lifeboat carrying all souls would have then drifted away, lost forever to the open ocean, while the supposedly doomed Mary Celeste, having merely vented its vapors, sailed on without them. This is a compelling and logical theory, but it too has its holes. A subsequent analysis of the cargo found that the barrels were made of red oak, which tends to swell when wet, making them less likely to leak significantly. Furthermore, the alcohol was denatured, meaning it was mixed with chemicals to make it undrinkable, which also makes it much less volatile and explosive than pure ethanol. While the alcohol explosion remains the most accepted theory among maritime historians, it is not the definitive answer. The true fate of the Mary Celeste is that there is no single, satisfying answer. It is a perfect storm of circumstance, a cascade of small, rational decisions based on a momentary, catastrophic misjudgment of danger. The mystery endures not because it is supernatural, but because it is so human. It speaks to the fragility of life at sea, where one misstep, one misreading of a creaking timber or a strange smell can lead to an irreversible tragedy. The ghost of the Mary Celeste is not a spectre haunting the decks. It is the ghost of that final, desperate decision, a choice made in a moment of sheer terror that sealed the fate of 10 people and left their ship to sail on as a monument to the ocean's most chilling secret, the silence of what we will never know. Leaving behind the world of ghost ships and frozen sagas, we now journey to the sun-baked deserts of ancient Egypt, to a time when a woman dared to rule as pharaoh. Her name was Hatshepsut, and her reign in the 15th century BC was one of the most prosperous and peaceful in Egypt's long history. But Hatshepsut was more than just a ruler. She was a master of propaganda and legacy building, and her greatest act of statecraft was not a war of conquest, but a breathtaking voyage of trade and discovery. To understand the mystery of her lost fleet, we must first understand her magnificent expedition to a place shrouded in myth and riches, the fabled land of Punt. For the ancient Egyptians, Punt was a near-legendary realm, a source of immense wealth and exotic goods that lay somewhere to the south, likely along the coasts of modern-day Sudan, Eritrea, or even the Horn of Africa. It was a land of fragrant resins, of towering trees, and of animals unknown in the Nile Valley. Previous pharaohs had sent expeditions, but none on the scale or with the spectacular success of Hatshepsut's venture. The entire story of this epic journey is carved in stunning, vibrant detail on the walls of her magnificent mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, a structure that itself seems to rise from the cliffs of Thebes like a mirage. These reliefs are not just art, they are a detailed logbook in stone, celebrating what was arguably the crowning achievement of her 2-decade reign. The carvings show a fleet of 5 magnificent ships, each powered by dozens of oarsmen and a single large square sail, setting out down the Nile and then braving the open waters of the Red Sea. The journey was long and perilous, but the rewards were beyond imagination. The scenes depict the Egyptians arriving in Punt, where they are greeted by the chief and his remarkably corpulent wife, a detail the artists took great care to highlight, perhaps to emphasize the land's prosperity. The goods they traded for are meticulously listed: heaps of fragrant myrrh resin, sacks of precious ebony and ivory, cinnamon bark, electrum, which is a natural alloy of gold and silver, and living leopards, baboons, and even a giraffe, which would have caused an absolute sensation back in Thebes. This was not a raid, it was a sophisticated, state-sponsored trade mission that brought back not just riches, but living proof of Egypt's reach and power, cementing Hatshepsut's legitimacy as a divine ruler who could command the very forces of nature and commerce. Yet, for all the triumphant detail on the temple walls, they leave us with a profound and tantalizing silence. The carvings show the fleet setting out and returning laden with treasure, but they tell us nothing of the journey itself, the storms, the navigational challenges, the potential losses. This is where our modern mystery begins. We know the expedition was a massive success, but what of the ships that made it possible? A voyage of that magnitude across the unpredictable Red Sea would have been incredibly dangerous. The Egyptians were skilled river navigators, but the open sea was a different beast altogether. The theory, then, is a simple but compelling one. Could one of Hatshepsut's ships, or perhaps even an entire fleet sent on a subsequent, unrecorded voyage, have met with disaster? Could a vessel laden with the very treasures we see depicted at Deir el-Bahari, gold, ivory, and barrels of priceless incense, lie shattered on the seabed, a sunken time capsule from the age of the female pharaoh? This is not just speculative fiction. It is the driving force behind a very real, ongoing archaeological quest. Modern marine archaeologists, armed with sophisticated technology like side-scan sonar and magnetometers, have begun to systematically survey the likely ancient maritime routes along the Egyptian Red Sea coast. Their work has already yielded incredible results, uncovering the remains of other, later pharaonic harbors, such as the one at Wadi al-Jarf from the 4th dynasty, which proved Egyptians were undertaking ambitious sea voyages over 1,000 years before Hatshepsut. These discoveries prove that the Egyptians had the capability and the ambition for major maritime enterprises. The search for Hatshepsut's fleet, however, is the ultimate prize. The potential discovery of even a single ship from her Punt expedition would be an archaeological sensation on a global scale. It would provide an unprecedented, tangible link to one of history's most famous trade missions. The organic materials that never survive in the desert, the wood of the hull, the ropes, the food remains, the very seeds of the plants they carried, could all be preserved in the unique conditions of the Red Sea, offering a level of detail about ancient shipbuilding, trade, and daily life that the temple carvings could never convey. The lost fleet of Hatshepsut represents a different kind of mystery from the ghostly abandonment of the Mary Celeste or the fleeting colony of the Vikings. This is a mystery of preservation and discovery. The ships are not necessarily lost to a supernatural fate, but simply lost to us, waiting for the right combination of technology, persistence, and luck to bring their story back to the surface. It is a quest to find the physical evidence for a story we already know, to touch the hull of a ship that once carried the dreams of a pharaoh and returned with the wonders of a legendary world. Finding it would not solve a crime or explain a disappearance. Instead, it would breathe life into a history we can only see carved in stone, transforming a two-dimensional relief into a three-dimensional reality, and finally giving voice to the sailors who braved the unknown for their queen. From the deserts of Egypt, we sail to the heart of the ancient world's greatest empire, where the Mediterranean Sea was not a barrier but a sprawling Roman highway. For centuries, the might of Rome was projected and sustained by its mastery of the sea. Its powerful war fleets, the classes, policed the waters from the coasts of Syria to the Pillars of Hercules, while an endless armada of merchant vessels formed the true lifeblood of the empire, a complex supply chain that fed the insatiable appetite of a million-strong city and its legions. These ships carried grain from Egypt, wine from Gaul, olive oil from Hispania, and exotic spices from the east. But with thousands of ships constantly plying these often treacherous waters, losses were a regular, catastrophic cost of doing business. The legend of Rome's lost fleets is not one of a single vanished squadron, but of countless individual tragedies, each one a sunken treasure chest of history lying silent on the seabed. One of the most tantalizing of these stories involves the notoriously extravagant Emperor Caligula. Historical accounts, particularly from the biographer Suetonius, describe Caligula's penchant for building colossal and outrageously opulent pleasure barges on Lake Nemi, just south of Rome. But a more mysterious maritime endeavor involved his obsession with Egyptian obelisks. He had a massive red granite obelisk which now stands in St. Peter's Square in Vatican City, transported from Heliopolis to Rome. The engineering required to load such a monolith weighing over 300 tons onto a specially built ship and sail it across the Mediterranean is staggering to contemplate. The ship designed for this task must have been a true Leviathan, the largest vessel of its age. The legend whispers that this very ship, along with others in its convoy, perhaps carrying additional obelisks or the emperor's other extravagant treasures, was lost on its return voyage or during a storm in the harbor, taking its colossal cargo and its secrets to the bottom. While the obelisk itself famously made it to Rome, the fate of the ship that carried it remains one of history's great maritime riddles. Equally compelling are the stories of the mundane, yet infinitely valuable, cargo ships that formed the backbone of Roman commerce. Consider the vessels on the lucrative Britain to Rome route. They sailed north laden with fine pottery, glassware, and wine for the administrators and legions stationed at the edge of the empire, and returned south packed with the raw wealth of the frontier, tons of Cornish tin, essential for making bronze, and Spanish gold and silver ingots mined by slave labor. A single storm could send a fleet of these merchantmen to the depths, instantly erasing a fortune and snuffing out the lives of every sailor, merchant, and slave on board. For centuries, these ships existed only in ancient texts and the scattered coins and amphorae found by fishermen. But then, a revolution began beneath the waves. The advent of scuba diving and later sophisticated underwater robotics gave birth to the science of marine archaeology, turning these legends into tangible, breathtaking discoveries. Perhaps the most famous example is the discovery of the Modia wreck off the coast of Tunisia, a 1st century BCE Roman ship found to be carrying an incredible cargo of Greek art, dozens of bronze and marble statues, sculptures, and over 60 magnificent marble columns being shipped as looted treasure to grace the villa of a wealthy Roman patrician. This one shipwreck provided a frozen moment in time, revealing the sophisticated plunder economy of the late Roman Republic. Even more common, and in many ways more telling, are the countless wrecks discovered that are nothing but vast mounds of amphorae, the ubiquitous clay jars used for transporting everything from wine and olive oil to fish sauce, a Roman delicacy called garum. These ceramic containers, stacked in the hold of a ship, have proven to be nearly indestructible. While the wooden hull and the ship's structure rot away, the amphorae often settle into a perfect, ghostly outline of the vessel on the seafloor. By studying the shapes of these jars and analyzing any residual contents, archaeologists can trace ancient trade routes with pinpoint accuracy, understanding not just what was traded, but where it was produced and who was consuming it. Each of these wrecks is a time capsule, a silent narrative of a journey interrupted. A single sandal, a cookpot, a set of gaming dice, or a pilgrim's lamp found amidst the amphorae tells a profoundly human story of the sailors who lived, worked, and died on these voyages. The legend of Rome's lost fleets is therefore being rewritten with every new dive, not by historians with scrolls, but by archaeologists with air tanks and sonar. They are piecing together a sunken map of the Roman world, one shipwreck at a time, revealing that the empire's true monument was not just its roads and aqueducts, but the countless wooden ships that braved the deep to bind it all together. But our exploration of the ancient seas would be incomplete without turning our gaze to the vast blue heart of the Pacific Ocean, where a story of human triumph and mystery unfolded over thousands of years. While European explorers were still fearful of sailing too far from land, a different kind of mariner was mastering the greatest ocean on Earth. The Polynesian expansion stands not as a legend of a single lost voyage, but as the most ambitious, sustained, and successful campaign of discovery and colonization in all of human history. Picture this, a realm of water stretching over 60 million square miles, dotted with islands so remote and tiny they are like grains of sand scattered across a continent. This was the world of the Polynesians. Beginning from a homeland in the Western Pacific, they set out in majestic double-hulled sailing canoes, vessels capable of carrying dozens of people, along with their plants, animals, and everything needed to start a new life. With no magnetic compass, no written charts, and no metal tools, they accomplished the impossible. Their navigation system was a profound, living science passed down through generations of master navigators. They were human supercomputers, reading the environment with a precision we can still scarcely believe. They memorized the celestial map, knowing the precise rising and setting points of hundreds of stars, using them as their compass. They understood the ocean's subtle language, feeling the direction and shape of swells as they reflected off distant islands, a sensation felt through the hull of the canoe. They watched the flight patterns of birds. The turn of a flock at dusk could point the way to land just over the horizon. They observed the color of the water and the types of driftwood and cloud formations, weaving all these clues into a mental chart that allowed them to pinpoint specks of land across thousands of miles of open ocean. This was wayfinding, an art form that was also a rigorous empirical science, and it allowed them to deliberately explore and settle an area larger than any other culture in history. Among the many legendary figures of this epic migration, the story of Cupid stands out. According to Maori oral history, Cupid was a great chief and navigator from the mythical homeland of Hawaii. While pursuing a monstrous octopus across the sea, he and his crew became the first Polynesians to sight the long, white clouds of a new land. He named it Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud, which we know today as New Zealand. The sagas describe his circumnavigation of the North Island, his encounters with the new environment, and his eventual return to Hawaii with detailed sailing directions that would later guide the great fleet canoes of permanent settlement. The discovery of Aotearoa represents the zenith of Polynesian voyaging, a journey of over 2,000 kilometers into cool, tempestuous waters far outside the tropical Polynesian Triangle. Yet, this incredible story of expansion also contains a deeper, more haunting mystery. For every successful settlement, there was the potential for isolation, and in some cases, for a flourishing society to turn in on itself and collapse. No example is more stark or captivating than that of Rapa Nui or Easter Island. Imagine the voyage that discovered this place, a speck of volcanic rock, one of the most isolated inhabited islands on the planet, over 1,200 miles from its nearest neighbor. The Polynesians who found it, led by the legendary chief Hotu-Mata according to their oral traditions, had achieved a navigational miracle. They established a thriving society, one that grew for centuries. They built an incredible culture, most famously expressed through the nearly 900 monumental stone statues, the moai, which they erected on massive ceremonial platforms. These statues, with their stern, elongated features, gaze inland across the island, representing deified ancestors watching over their descendants. For a long time, the island prospered. But then, something went terribly wrong. The mystery of Rapa Nui is what happened to this once vibrant people. The traditional narrative, supported by extensive archaeological evidence, points to a tragic story of ecological collapse and societal unraveling. When the Polynesians arrived, the island was covered in a lush palm forest. Over centuries, the population grew, and trees were cut down for canoe building, for moving the massive moai, and for firewood. The evidence suggests that eventually the last tree was felled. Deforestation led to catastrophic soil erosion, making it difficult to grow crops. Without large trees, they could no longer build the large, ocean-going canoes that were essential for fishing in deeper waters and for maintaining contact with the outside world. The islanders were trapped, their lifeline to the wider Polynesian world severed forever. Deprived of resources, their society seems to have descended into chaos and warfare. Oral histories tell of a period of violence, and archaeological sites show spear points made of obsidian, a volcanic glass, becoming common in later layers. The most poignant symbol of this collapse is the evidence that the moai, the very symbols of their ancestral power, were systematically toppled, perhaps by warring clans in a final rejection of the gods who had failed them. The story of Rapa Nui serves as a powerful, sobering counterpoint to the triumphant narrative of Polynesian discovery. It shows that the same incredible navigational skills that allowed them to find these remote islands could also lead them to places so fragile that their very success contained the seeds of their own downfall. It is a profound lesson about the delicate balance between a culture and its environment, a reminder that even the greatest explorers could not escape the ultimate consequences of their isolation. The Polynesian legacy is thus a dual one. It is a breathtaking testament to human courage, intelligence, and adaptability, and it is also a poignant warning from the past, etched in stone on the most remote island in the world. Yet while the Polynesians were navigating by the stars to find real islands back in medieval Europe, a different kind of quest was taking shape, one driven not by charts and swells, but by faith, fear, and a magnificent fantasy. This is the legend of Prester John, a story so powerful it would alter the course of exploration for centuries. Imagine the world of 12th century Christendom, a world where Europe felt itself besieged. To the east, the formidable forces of Islam were advancing, and the crusades to reclaim the Holy Land were meeting with costly and demoralizing failures. In this climate of anxiety and fervent hope, a rumor began to spread like wildfire, a rumor of a savior from the east. Whispers told of a fabulously wealthy and powerful Christian king, a direct descendant of the three magi, who ruled a vast, pious, and technologically advanced kingdom somewhere beyond the lands of the Muslims. His name was Prester John, a title meaning Priest John. He was said to be both a king and a patriarch, a man of immense spiritual and temporal power. Then, around the year 1165, a document appeared that sent shockwaves through the courts of Europe, the Letter of Prester John. Addressed to the Byzantine emperor, this fantastical epistle described a kingdom of almost unimaginable splendor and piety. It spoke of a land flowing with milk and honey, where pepper grew like shrubs and gems were as common as pebbles. Prester John's palace was made of crystal, his throne of ivory and onyx, and before it stood a magic mirror that revealed any plot against his realm. His kingdom was home to mythical creatures like giants and centaurs, and it contained the fountain of youth. Most importantly, he commanded an army of millions, and he declared his intention to march westward, crush the Muslim powers, and reclaim Jerusalem for Christendom. We now know the letter was almost certainly a clever forgery, likely crafted by a European cleric, but its impact was immediate and profound. It gave a tangible shape to a desperate hope. For generations, the legend evolved, with the location of this utopian kingdom shifting on the map. At first, it was placed in India, a land already shrouded in mystery and wealth. Later, as knowledge of Asia grew, it was moved further east into the vast, unknown stretches of Central Asia. This belief in a powerful Christian ally lurking behind enemy lines became a central pillar of medieval geopolitics. It was this legend that directly fueled the age of exploration. Portuguese and Spanish princes, driven by a mixture of religious zeal and commercial ambition, saw in Prester John the key to a grand strategy. If they could sail around Africa and link up with his kingdom, they could outflank the Muslim world, open a direct trade route to the spice-rich Indies, and create a powerful Christian pincer movement. This was the explicit dream of figures like Prince Henry the Navigator. He poured vast resources into exploring the West African coast, and his captains carried with them two essential items on every voyage: navigational instruments and letters of credence addressed to Prester John, hoping that around the next headland they would find his golden kingdom. So, where did this enduring myth come from? Was there any grain of truth in this towering legend? Many historians believe the answer lies not in the Far East, but in the highlands of Africa. For centuries, Europe had vague, second-hand knowledge of the Ethiopian Empire, a powerful and ancient Christian kingdom that had indeed been isolated from the rest of Christendom by the rise of Islam. Tales of this kingdom of Prester John in Africa began to filter back to Europe through traders and pilgrims. The connection seemed to fit. Here was a real, powerful Christian monarch ruling a realm that was, from a European perspective, fabulously exotic and remote. Embassies were eventually exchanged, and in the early 15th century, a delegation from the Ethiopian emperor even visited the courts of Europe. The mystery and the source of the lost voyage aspect of our story lies in the many failed attempts to make this connection. Numerous European emissaries were dispatched over the centuries to find Prester John's court. Some of these envoys simply vanished without a trace, their ships lost at sea or their caravans disappearing into the deserts of Arabia or the mountains of Central Asia. They embarked on a quest for a mythical king, and in doing so became legends of disappearance themselves. Their fate was to become a footnote to the larger fantasy, their unsuccessful journeys only adding to the aura of impenetrable mystery that surrounded the Prester John legend. The final, poignant twist is that when Portuguese explorers like Pero de Covilhã finally did reach the Ethiopian court in the late 15th century, they found a real and fascinating Christian kingdom, but it was not the utopia of the letter. It was a land with its own complex politics, its own struggles, and a form of Christianity that seemed alien to European eyes. The magnificent fantasy of Prester John collided with a more complicated reality, and the legend, having served its purpose of pulling Europe out of its shell and onto the world's oceans, slowly faded from the maps. Yet its legacy was indelible. It was a dream that helped chart the real world, proving that sometimes the most powerful force in exploration is not a compass but a story. While the legend of Prester John sent Europeans searching the east for a Christian king, another story, born in the misty monasteries of the North Atlantic, told of a holy man who sailed west into the great ocean void and discovered paradise itself. This is the tale of Saint Brendan the Navigator, an Irish monk whose legendary journey would echo through the ages, blurring the line between devout faith and daring discovery. In the 6th century, Ireland was a bastion of learning and Christianity in a Europe fractured by the fall of Rome. From this world of scholarship and severe piety emerged a new kind of hero, the pilgrim saint who sought God not in the comfort of a monastery, but in the ultimate act of self-exile, casting himself upon the waves in a gesture of total trust in divine providence. Saint Brendan was one of these ascetic adventurers. The story of his incredible voyage is preserved in the Navigatio Sancti Brendani Abbotis, or the Voyage of Saint Brendan the Abbot, a text that became a medieval bestseller, copied and read across Europe for hundreds of years. It recounts how Brendan, inspired by tales of a promised land for the saints from another monk, decided to seek out this terra repromissionis sanctorum, the land of promise of the saints. He and a band of devoted monks constructed a remarkable vessel for their quest, a carrache. This was not a wooden ship, but a frame of wood over which they stretched ox hides, stitching them together and sealing the seams with animal fat to make it watertight. It was a boat design used for centuries in the North Atlantic, a lightweight but incredibly resilient craft, perfectly suited for riding the powerful swells of the open ocean. And so, with only God as their chart, they set sail into the unknown. What follows in the Navigatio is a 7-year odyssey that reads like a scripture scroll mixed with a sailor's wildest yarn. Brendan and his brothers encounter a series of islands, each one a divine lesson or a miraculous test. They land on an island that proves to be the back of the great sea monster Jasconius, who they mistakenly take for land and even light a fire upon before he awakens and plunges into the depths. They celebrate Easter on the back of another massive creature they believe to be a whale. They happen upon an island of gigantic blacksmiths who hurl lumps of slag at them, and another where a flock of white birds recite psalms, revealed to be fallen angels waiting for redemption. They sail through crystalline pillars that rise from the sea and through regions of fog so dense they cannot see. The narrative is a rich tapestry of Celtic Christian symbolism, where every creature and landscape is a manifestation of God's creation, and every peril is a trial of faith. After years of wandering this mystical seascape, they finally reach their destination, the beautiful and peaceful island of the blessed. The text describes it as a land of perpetual light without night, where the vegetation is lush and the fruit is abundant. They find a land inhabited by a community of silent, pious monks who have been waiting for them. After gathering a wealth of jewels and spiritual wisdom, Brendan and his crew are told to return to Ireland, their mission complete, their faith proven. For centuries, the Navigatio was read as a powerful allegory, a spiritual journey of the soul toward salvation. But in the modern era, a tantalizing question began to emerge. Could this fantastical story also contain a kernel of geographical truth? Could the island of the blessed have been a real place, and could Irish monks in a leather boat have actually reached North America nearly 1,000 years before Columbus and 400 years before the Vikings? The theory is not as far-fetched as it might seem. We know from historical records that Irish monks were master mariners who established remote hermitages on some of the most inhospitable islands in the North Atlantic, including the Skellig Islands off Ireland and even Iceland before the Norse arrived. The Navigatio itself contains descriptions that, stripped of their miraculous elements, sound strikingly like real North Atlantic phenomena. The crystal pillar could be a description of a massive iceberg. The island of blacksmiths with fire and smoke could be a volcanic island like Iceland. The land of perpetual light could be a description of the midnight sun in the Arctic summer. The journey to the island of the blessed is said to have taken many days sailing through fog, which perfectly describes the journey across the Labrador Sea to the coast of Newfoundland. The most compelling evidence for this theory, however, came not from a parchment but from a practical experiment. In the 1970s, a British explorer and historian named Tim Severin decided to test the feasibility of St. Brendan's voyage. He built a replica of the Saint's Currach using the exact materials and methods described in the Navigatio, a wooden frame covered in ox hide sealed with wool grease. He named the vessel the Brendan, and with a small crew, he set out from Ireland to see if such a boat could survive the journey across the North Atlantic. It was an epic and perilous undertaking. They battled storms, dodged icebergs, and carefully navigated past the ice packs of the far north. Astonishingly, the little leather boat proved remarkably seaworthy, its flexible hide hull riding the waves like a cork. After a voyage of just over a year, covering nearly 4,000 miles, Tim Severin and his crew successfully landed in Newfoundland. He did not claim to have proven that St. Brendan made the journey, but he had proven something just as important, that it was technologically possible. A 6th century Irish monk in a leather boat could have done it. The voyage of the Brendan transformed the legend from a mere allegory into a plausible historical event. It demonstrated that the currents and winds of the North Atlantic form a kind of maritime highway that could have carried a determined voyager from the British Isles to the coast of Canada. While we may never find archaeological evidence of a temporary Irish monastic settlement in the New World, something as ephemeral as a leather boat and a handful of monks leaving no stone buildings behind the story of St. Brendan endures as a powerful testament to human courage and faith. It stands as a bridge between the world of myth and the world of maps, a reminder that sometimes the greatest discoveries begin not with a fleet and a royal commission, but with a single boat, a handful of brothers, and an unshakable belief in what might lie over the horizon. Now we turn our attention from the vast, open ocean to the tangled, mysterious coastline of the New World, where a different kind of disappearance has captivated historians and storytellers for centuries. This is the story of the lost colony of Roanoke, a tale that begins not with a sinking ship, but with a vanishing act. In the late 16th century, England was desperate to catch up with its Spanish rivals in the race to colonize the Americas. Sir Walter Raleigh was granted a charter by Queen Elizabeth I, and he dispatched an expedition to establish a foothold on the coast of present-day North Carolina. The first group of soldiers sent in 1585 fared poorly, clashing with the local Secotern people and struggling to survive. They returned to England the next year with a passing fleet, leaving behind a small holding force, 15 men whose own fate would soon be swallowed by the larger mystery. Undeterred, Raleigh organized a second, more ambitious expedition in 1587. This was to be a true colony, a community of over 100 men, women, and children, led by the artist and friend of Raleigh, Governor John White. Among the colonists was White's own daughter, Elena, and her husband, Ananias Dare. Shortly after their arrival, Elena gave birth to a daughter, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas. This should have been a moment of hope, a symbol of the colony's future. But the situation was precarious from the start. They arrived too late in the season to plant crops, and their relations with the local tribes, already strained by the previous expedition, were tense and distrustful. By the summer, the colonists were running low on supplies and facing an uncertain future. They persuaded Governor White, the grandfather of the newborn Virginia, to sail back to England to plead for more support and supplies. It was a decision that must have weighed heavily on him, leaving his family and the entire community in a fragile, fledgling settlement. White's return to England could not have been more poorly timed. He arrived just as the Spanish Armada was preparing to invade, and every seaworthy English ship was commandeered for the nation's defense. For 3 agonizing years, John White was trapped in England, his desperate requests for a relief mission denied or delayed by the all-consuming war. He must have lived in a state of constant dread, imagining the worst for his daughter and granddaughter. Finally, in 1590, he managed to secure passage on a privateering ship, his hope and anxiety surely growing with every mile across the Atlantic. When the Carolina coastline finally came into view, White and the landing party made their way to Roanoke Island. They were met with an eerie, profound silence. The settlement was deserted. The houses and fortifications had been carefully dismantled, not destroyed in an attack, suggesting a planned and orderly departure. There were no signs of a struggle, no graves and no cross, a pre-arranged signal that White had agreed upon with the colonists to mean they were in grave distress. The only clues were a few personal items buried in chests, and most famously, a single word carved into a post, Croatoan, and on a nearby tree, the letters Crow were found. To John White, this was a clear message. The colonists had moved to Croatoan Island, the home of a nearby tribe who had been generally friendly to the English. He was desperate to sail there immediately, but a massive storm was brewing. The ship's captain, unwilling to risk his vessel, refused and ordered a return to England. John White never made it back to Croatoan Island, and he never saw his family again. The mystery was frozen in time. So, what really happened to the 115 men, women, and children of the Roanoke colony? The word Croatoan is the Rosetta Stone of this mystery, and its interpretation has led to several compelling yet unproven theories. The leading theory for centuries has been one of integration. This suggests that, facing starvation and isolation, the colonists split into smaller groups and sought refuge with nearby Native American tribes, most likely the Croatan people on Hatteras Island. Over the years, they would have intermarried and been absorbed into the tribe, their English identity slowly fading away. This theory is supported by later reports from English explorers. In the early 17th century, Jamestown settlers heard persistent rumors from various tribes about people who dressed and lived like the English further south. John Smith himself, of Pocahontas fame, was told of survivors. Most notably, in 1707, a reconnaissance mission sent to the area reported seeing Native Americans with gray eyes, and that some tribesmen claimed their ancestors could talk in a book, a possible reference to reading English. The second primary theory is far darker, that the colony was wiped out by either disease, starvation, or a concerted attack. The Secotun tribe, led by the chief Wanchese, had been hostile to the earlier English expedition and may have seen the new colony as an existential threat. If an attack did occur, the lack of bodies or evidence of battle is puzzling, though not impossible to explain over the course of 3 years. A third theory posits that the colonists attempted to relocate en masse, perhaps intending to sail north to the Chesapeake Bay area, a location they had previously discussed and met with disaster at sea. The truth likely lies in a combination of these ideas, and recent archaeological work has begun to peel back the layers of this 400-year-old enigma. A persistent and fascinating line of inquiry has focused on a site known as Site X on the mainland. Archaeologists from the First Colony Foundation have uncovered fragments of English pottery from the correct time period at this location, miles from Roanoke Island, suggesting that at least a small group of colonists did relocate there. Furthermore, on Hatteras Island, the hypothesized home of the Croatan, excavations have yielded a stunning array of artifacts that fuse English and Native American life. A signet ring from the 16th century, pieces of a gun and sword hilt, and fragments of English pottery have all been found intermingled with traditional Croatan tools and village remains. A particularly poignant discovery was a small piece of a slate writing tablet, alongside a pencil, hinting at the literacy that so intrigued the Jamestown settlers. These findings don't provide a single dramatic answer. They don't reveal a mass grave or a hidden fortress. Instead, they paint a subtler, more human picture. They suggest a story of slow disintegration and assimilation. Some colonists may have been killed, others may have tried to sail away and perished, but the most compelling evidence now points to a significant number surviving for decades, living alongside the Croatan people, trading their metal tools and weapons, and gradually becoming part of a new, blended community. The ultimate fate of individuals like Virginia Dare remains a ghost in the historical record, but the lost colony of Roanoke may not have been lost in the way we once thought. It may have simply dissolved, its people melting into the landscape of America, becoming some of the first to truly live between two worlds. Their story is not one of a single catastrophic event, but of a slow-motion disappearance, a quiet absorption into the very land they had come to conquer, leaving behind only a single cryptic word as their final message to a world they would never see again. But from vanishing colonies and saintly voyages, we plunge now into a world of outright greed, betrayal, and tantalizing tangible riches. This is the legend of Captain William Kidd, a man whose name became a byword for buried treasure, yet whose real story is a tragic roller coaster of ambition and a shattered reputation. Kidd was not born a pirate. In fact, his life began on the respectable side of the law. A successful Scottish sea captain in the late 1600s, he was hired by a powerful syndicate of English nobles, including the Lord High Admiral himself, for a very specific and legally dubious mission. He was granted a privateer's commission, a license to attack and plunder enemy ships, specifically those of France and pirates preying on English trade. This was a common practice, a way for governments to wage naval war with private money. Kidd's mission, however, was fraught with peril from the start. His ship, the Adventure Galley, was plagued by delays, a sickly crew, and a catastrophic lack of success. For months, they sailed the shipping lanes of the Indian Ocean, finding no French prizes and no pirates. As the pressure mounted from his wealthy backers who expected a return on their investment, and with his own crew growing mutinous and desperate for plunder, Kidd's resolve began to crack. The turning point, the moment that transformed him from a legal privateer into a wanted pirate in the eyes of the British Crown, was the capture of two ships. The first was a small Armenian vessel, the Quedagh Merchant, which was sailing under a French pass, technically making it a legal prize. But its cargo was monumental, a fortune in silks, satins, gold, and silver. The second and more damning was the seizure of an English-owned ship. This was an unforgivable act, a violation of his commission that instantly made him an outlaw. Kidd was now a pirate, and the very men who had hired him, seeking to distance themselves from the scandal, publicly denounced him and issued a warrant for his arrest. Captain Kidd became a hunted man. Knowing he was sailing into a storm, he made a fateful decision to return to the American colonies, hoping his political connections could somehow clear his name. Before reaching his destination, however, he took a crucial step that would ignite a treasure-hunting frenzy for centuries to come. He stopped along the coast of Long Island and visited a wealthy landowner named John Gardiner. Here, Kidd entrusted Gardiner with a portion of his treasure for safekeeping, a chest of gold, precious gems, and other valuables. This was not a secret, buried hoard, it was a temporary deposit. But this single, documented act became the seed from which the entire legend of Kidd's buried treasure grew. When Kidd finally arrived in New York, he was betrayed, arrested, and shipped to England in chains to stand trial for piracy and murder. His execution in 1701 was a gruesome public spectacle designed to serve as a warning. The rope broke on the first attempt, and he had to be strung up a second time. But even in death, Kidd wielded power. Just before his execution, he allegedly told a reporter that he had buried a treasure worth £100,000, an almost unimaginable sum at the time, and that he alone knew its location. Whether this was a final act of defiance, a desperate ploy for a stay of execution, or simply a story that grew in the telling, it worked. The hunt was on. The treasure Kidd left with John Gardiner was quickly recovered by the authorities, but it only whetted the public's appetite. The idea that a far greater fortune was still out there, hidden in some secluded cove or lonely island, captured the imagination of the world. This is where the legends truly take root, branching out into multiple, tantalizing possibilities. The most persistent and well-documented legend revolves around Gardiner's Island itself. Despite the official recovery of one chest, rumors persisted that Kidd had buried other caches on the island under the cover of night. For over 300 years, hopeful treasure hunters have dug up its beaches and combed its woods, convinced that another fortune lies just beneath the surface. But the mystery doesn't end on the East Coast. A completely different strand of the Kidd legend places his treasure over 1,000 miles inland, in the fresh waters of the Great Lakes. The story goes that after his arrest, one of Kidd's first mates, a man desperate to avoid capture, sailed a longboat up the Hudson River and into Lake Ontario, eventually making his way to Lake Michigan. There, in the area now known as Thunder Bay near the coast of Michigan, he is said to have buried the captain's most valuable treasures to keep them from falling into British hands. This theory, while lacking the historical paper trail of the Gardiner's Island story, is fueled by local folklore and a few intriguing, if inconclusive, physical clues. A stone slab carved with mysterious symbols, often called the Leelanau stone, was discovered in the area in the early 20th century and was interpreted by some as a cryptic map left by Kidd's crew. While most archaeologists dismiss it as a modern hoax or a piece of Native American petroglyph unrelated to pirates, it continues to be a focal point for believers. The enduring power of Captain Kidd's legend lies in this perfect storm of factors: a documented history of immense wealth, his own tantalizing final words, and the existence of multiple, plausible hiding places from the coves of New England to the shores of the Great Lakes. Modern treasure hunters, armed with metal detectors and side-scan sonar, continue the search, driven by the same dream that has captivated people for 3 centuries. The true treasure of Captain Kidd, however, may not be a chest of gold, but the legend itself, a story of a man trapped by circumstance, whose final act was to create a mystery so compelling that we are still digging for the truth and the treasure to this very day. But the oceans hold other, more chilling kinds of disappearances, stories where not a single soul is left behind to tell a tale, where a massive modern ship simply vanishes from the surface of the earth as if it never existed. This is the haunting mystery of the SS Waratah, a tragedy so complete it has earned the grim nickname, the Titanic of the South. In the summer of 1909, the Waratah was a symbol of modern imperial confidence. A brand new 11,000-ton passenger liner, she was built for the prestigious run between Australia and England, a floating palace designed to carry emigrants, tourists, and valuable cargo. She was lavishly appointed with electric lights, spacious cabins, and a reputation for being one of the most advanced vessels on the route. When she set sail from Melbourne on her second voyage home to London in July of that year, she carried 211 passengers and crew, a full complement of people heading for a new life or returning home from the colonies. The voyage proceeded normally at first, with scheduled stops in Adelaide and Durban, South Africa. It was after leaving Durban for the final leg to Cape Town that things began to feel unsettled. Another ship, the Harlow, reported seeing the Waratah on the evening of July 27th. The captain of the Harlow noted that the liner was battling a fierce gale and seemed to be riding heavily in the water, but this was not entirely unusual for a storm in that notoriously rough stretch of ocean known as the Wild Coast. What is chilling is that the Harlow's captain also reported that the Waratah's lights simply vanished into the squall behind them. He thought little of it at the time, assuming the larger ship had merely been obscured by weather. That was the last confirmed sighting of the SS Waratah. she never arrived in Cape Town. A massive sea and air search was launched, but it found nothing. No wreckage, no lifeboats, no flotsam. The ship and every single person aboard had been utterly erased. The complete absence of a distress call is one of the most perplexing elements of this mystery. In an era before satellite communication, ships used wireless telegraphy, and the Waratah was equipped with one. For a ship of its size to founder without the radio operator having even a moment to tap out an SOS suggests a catastrophe of unimaginable speed and violence, a calamity that struck so fast it gave its victims no time to react. In the wake of the disappearance, theories began to swirl, many focusing on the ship's fundamental design. Despite its modern appearance, some passengers on its earlier voyages had expressed concerns. One businessman, Claude Sawyer, had been so unnerved during the outbound journey to Australia that he actually disembarked in Durban, sending a telegram to his wife that read, "Thought Waratah top heavy." Landed Durban, he reported a terrifying dream of a man with a long sword in a blood-red sea, which he took as a premonition. Other passengers described the ship as being tender, meaning it rolled heavily and recovered slowly, a dangerous characteristic for a vessel sailing in waters known for freak waves. This idea of top heaviness points to a potential design flaw. The Waratah was top heavy. The theory suggests that in the heart of that ferocious storm, the ship was caught in a perfect storm of physics. A massive wave, or more likely a succession of them, could have caused a roll so extreme that the ship could not right itself. If water flooded into the vessel through open portholes or cargo hatches, it could have led to a sudden, catastrophic loss of stability, capsizing and sending the liner to the bottom in a matter of minutes. This scenario would explain the lack of a distress call and the stunning absence of debris. A capsized ship can sink almost intact, trapping air inside and creating a vortex that pulls everything down with it, leaving no trace on the surface. Another compelling theory involves the phenomenon of the rogue wave. For centuries, sailors told stories of walls of water appearing out of nowhere, but marine science long dismissed them as myth. Today, we know these waves are very real. Satellite data has confirmed the existence of solitary waves that can reach heights of 100 feet or more, appearing suddenly and with enough force to break a large ship in two. The Agulhas Current, which runs down the southeast coast of Africa where the Waratah was last seen, is a notorious breeding ground for such freak waves. The convergence of a strong current flowing against the direction of a powerful storm can create chaotic, steep seas capable of generating a single, monstrous wave. The terrifying possibility is that the SS Waratah, already potentially unstable, was struck broadside by one of these liquid mountains. The impact could have shattered its hull, broken its back, or simply rolled it over in an instant, again explaining the swift and total nature of the disaster. The legacy of the Waratah is one of profound silence. It serves as a stark reminder that even at the dawn of the 20th century, with all its technological pride, the ocean retained its ancient, terrifying power. The search for the wreck continues to this day, a holy grail for maritime archaeologists. Finding its final resting place on the seabed is the only way to finally answer the question that has lingered for over a century. Was it a flaw in the ship or a flaw in our understanding of the sea that sent 211 souls into the abyss without a single cry for help? The ocean holds its secret tightly, leaving us only with the ghost of a ship that sailed into a storm and simply ceased to be. Now, picture a different kind of threat, one that did not come from the sea's mysterious depths, but arrived upon it in an overwhelming, terrifying wave of organized power. This is the story of Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan and the emperor of the vast Mongol Yuan dynasty in China. Having conquered much of the Asian mainland, he turned his ambitious gaze across a narrow strip of water to the islands of Japan. The Japanese, confident in their divine protection and the treacherous waters that surrounded them, refused to submit to his demands for tribute. In response, Kublai Khan decided to teach them a lesson in Mongol might, launching not one, but two of the largest naval invasion forces the world had ever seen. The first attempt came in 1274. This initial fleet was formidable, carrying perhaps up to 900 ships and a combined force of Mongols, Chinese, and Koreans numbering around 33,000 soldiers. They made landfall in Hakata Bay on the island of Kyushu, and the fighting was brutal. The Japanese samurai, accustomed to a code of honorable single combat, were thrown into disarray by the Mongols' organized mass warfare tactics, their use of explosive bombs catapulted over the walls, and their coordinated volleys of poison-tipped arrows. Yet, after a day of fierce fighting and with their supplies running low, the Mongol commanders made a fateful decision. They pulled their troops back to the ships to regroup for a fresh assault the next morning. That night, a fierce storm blew in, severely damaging a significant portion of the fleet. The invasion was called off, and the battered armada retreated to Korea. For the Japanese, this was a lucky break, but they knew it was only a reprieve. Kublai Khan was not a man to be denied. He sent envoys again, and when the Japanese responded by beheading them, he began planning an invasion of truly apocalyptic scale. The second invasion fleet, launched in 1281, was a logistical marvel of the medieval world, a floating army so vast it is almost impossible to visualize. Historical accounts, both Mongol and Korean, describe two separate fleets converging on Japan. The Eastern Route Fleet, launched from Korea, consisted of around 900 ships. But it was the Southern Route Fleet, assembled from ports in conquered China, that defied belief. This second force was composed of an estimated 3,500 vessels. When combined, the entire invasion force may have involved over 4,000 ships carrying a staggering 140,000 soldiers, sailors, and support personnel. To put that in perspective, the Spanish Armada sent against England 300 years later numbered around 130 ships. This was an order of magnitude larger, a veritable city of wood and sail descending upon Japan with a single, grim purpose: total conquest. The Japanese defenders, having built stone walls along the coast of Hakata Bay after the first invasion, prepared for a desperate last stand. The initial stages of the battle were a bloody stalemate, with the Mongol forces unable to break through the Japanese defenses on the beaches. For weeks, the two forces were locked in a grueling conflict, with the massive Mongol fleet anchored offshore. Then, history and legend merged into one of Japan's most foundational national stories. As the Mongol fleet lay at anchor, a colossal typhoon, a seasonal storm of unimaginable ferocity, swept across the sea and directly into Hakata Bay. For 2 days, the divine winds, the kamikaze, raged. The storm's fury was absolute. The Mongol ships, many of them river barges hastily converted for ocean travel and lashed together for stability, were utterly defenseless against the towering waves and hurricane-force winds. They were dashed against the rocks, smashed into each other, and driven onto the shore. Men, horses, and supplies were thrown into a churning, chaotic maelstrom. The Japanese, watching from the safety of their walls, saw the entire invading fleet being torn to splinters before their eyes. When the storm finally subsided, the sea was littered with wreckage and corpses. The vast majority of the Mongol fleet was destroyed, and with it, any hope of conquering Japan. The surviving ships limped home in disgrace. This event was so transformative that it entered the Japanese national consciousness as a divine intervention, a clear sign that their islands were under the direct protection of the gods. For centuries, the story of the kamikaze was just that, a powerful legend, a mix of historical fact and national myth. But in the modern era, underwater archaeology has begun to reveal the tangible truth behind the legend, turning epic poetry into physical evidence. Starting in the 1980s, marine archaeologists began a systematic search of the seabed in and around Hakata Bay. What they found was a graveyard of Kublai Khan's lost fleet. To date, the remains of several dozen ships have been located, often buried in the silt and sand, their wooden hulls remarkably preserved. The discovery of these wrecks has provided a treasure trove of information. They are not warships in the European sense, but broad, flat-bottomed vessels, many of which were indeed designed for river transport, making them dangerously unstable in the open ocean. Archaeologists have recovered a stunning array of artifacts from these sunken time capsules. Chinese ceramic grenades filled with gunpowder and shrapnel, stone anchors weighing tons, Mongol composite bows, and even the personal seals of Mongol commanders, instantly connecting a specific wreck to a historical figure from the invasion. The physical evidence of these wrecks is undeniable proof of the catastrophe, but it has also sparked a fascinating historical debate. The traditional narrative, heavily promoted by later Japanese chroniclers, credits the kamikaze with single-handedly destroying the Mongol fleet. However, some historians now argue that the story is more complex. They point to evidence from the wrecks themselves and from historical records that suggest the Japanese defense played a more significant role than previously acknowledged. The ships discovered show signs of battle damage, burn marks from fire attacks, holes that could have been made by projectiles, indicating that the Japanese were actively harassing the fleet with small, agile boats, setting fire to ships and engaging in close-quarters combat even before the storm hit. The theory posits that the Mongol fleet was already battered, demoralized, and in disarray from these constant naval attacks. Their ships were likely crammed together, having been driven close to shore by the Japanese tactics, making them a perfect, concentrated target for the typhoon when it finally struck. In this interpretation, the kamikaze was not a lone savior, but the coup de grace, the final, overwhelming blow delivered after the Japanese defenders had already bloodied the nose of the giant. The legend of the lost fleet of Kublai Khan, therefore, stands at the intersection of natural history, military strategy, and national identity. It is a story of human ambition on an epic scale, meeting the raw, unstoppable power of nature. The underwater evidence does not diminish the legend of the divine wind. Instead, it gives it a terrifying physical reality. We can now see the very timbers that were shattered by that ancient storm, holding in their waterlogged grain the story of a world that was almost conquered, and the tempest that forever changed the course of a nation's destiny. Yet as powerful as the legend of Prester John was in pulling Europe eastward, another story, one of pure, unadulterated gold, would soon exert an even stronger pull to the west, creating a different kind of fantasy that would reshape the map of South America. This is the legend of El Dorado, a tale that begins not with a city but with a man. Far from being a lost metropolis of shimmering streets and golden temples, the original El Dorado was in fact a person. His story comes to us from the Muisca people, a sophisticated confederation of tribes living high in the Andes Mountains in what is now modern-day Colombia. Their most sacred ritual involved the anointment of a new chief, or Zipa. To mark this profound spiritual and political transition, the chosen leader would travel to the center of Lake Guatavita, a deep, circular lake formed in an ancient meteor crater. There, on a raft laden with treasures and accompanied by 4 priests, the new chief would be stripped naked. His body was then completely covered in a sticky resin and fine gold dust, turning him into a living, breathing golden statue, the El Dorado, which literally translates to the Gilded One. As the raft reached the center of the lake, under the gaze of thousands of spectators lining the crater's rim, a profound silence would fall. The chief would then dive into the sacred, icy waters, washing the gold from his body as an offering to the gods. Meanwhile, his attendants would throw a fortune in emeralds, golden figurines, and other precious objects into the lake. This was not an act of mere display. It was a sacred contract with the divine, a ritual of immense spiritual power that cemented the leader's connection to his people and their gods. When the first Spanish conquistadors arrived in the early 16th century, they heard fragments of this story, likely from coastal tribes who themselves had only heard it second or third hand. In the telling and retelling, the nuance was lost. The Spanish, whose imaginations were already feverish with the plundered gold of the Aztecs and the Incas, took the core of the story and built a new, grander fantasy around it. They weren't interested in a one-time ritual, they fixated on the gold itself. The man became a city, the city became a kingdom. The singular act of offering became an endless supply of unimaginable wealth just waiting to be found. The legend mutated into a vision of a mythical king who ruled a city of such opulence that gold was as common as stone, a place where the very dust on the streets was made of gold. This fantasy of El Dorado became an obsession, a siren song that lured hundreds, then thousands, of Europeans to their deaths in the most unforgiving landscapes on the continent. It's crucial to understand that these were not just treasure hunts. They were major military expeditions, often launched from coastal settlements that served as their final link to the civilized world. One of the most famous and disastrous of these quests was led by Gonzalo Pizarro, the younger brother of the infamous Francisco Pizarro who had conquered the Inca Empire. In 1541, hearing rumors that the kingdom of El Dorado, which the Spanish now called País de la Canela, or the Land of Cinnamon, lay east of Quito, Gonzalo assembled a massive force. He gathered over 220 Spanish soldiers, many of them armored and on horseback, and 4,000 indigenous porters and warriors. They set out from the Andes, descending into the cloud forests of the eastern slopes, a journey from a world of stone and order into one of tangled, overwhelming green. The expedition was a slow-motion catastrophe from the start. The terrain was a nightmare of swamps, raging rivers, and impenetrable jungle. The promised cinnamon trees were sparse and commercially worthless. Their supplies ran out, and the indigenous porters, treated brutally by the Spanish, began to die of disease, starvation, and exhaustion. Desperate, Pizarro ordered the construction of a small brigantine and sent his second-in-command, Francisco de Orellana, ahead with about 60 men to scout for food down the Napo River. Orellana and his men, carried by the powerful current, found it impossible to paddle back upstream to rejoin Pizarro. Faced with the choice of certain starvation if they tried to return or the complete unknown if they continued forward, they made a historic decision. They let the river take them. Orellana's group became the first Europeans to navigate the entire length of the Amazon River, from the Andes to the Atlantic Ocean, a monumental feat of exploration born directly from the failed search for El Dorado. When Orellana finally emerged on the coast months later with his ragged band of survivors, he brought back tales not just of the river's immense scale, but of encountering powerful, populous chiefdoms along its banks, including one led by a tribe of female warriors he called the Amazons, thus giving the river its name. Back in the jungle, Gonzalo Pizarro and his remaining men, believing Orellana had betrayed them, were forced to enact a horrific retreat. They ate their horses, then their hunting dogs. Of the thousands who had set out, only a few dozen skeletal, half-mad Spaniards eventually staggered back into Quito, their quest a total and bloody failure. But the legend of El Dorado was not so easily killed by mere suffering. The dream of gold was more powerful than the memory of death. For the next century, more expeditions were launched, each one peeling back another layer of the South American continent, each one adding new, erroneous details to the ever-shifting map of the Golden City. Sir Walter Raleigh, the English courtier, was famously captivated by the story. He mounted 2 expeditions to Guyana in search of the city he called Manoa, which he believed lay on the shores of a vast inland sea, the legendary Lake Maritime. His detailed, fanciful accounts, published in a book called The Discovery of Guyana, further entrenched the myth in the European imagination, even as his own voyages found nothing but hardship and conflict. The tragic irony of the quest for El Dorado is that the Spanish, in their relentless, brutal search, were often walking right over the real sources of wealth. The ritual of the Gilded Man was real. The Muisca Confederation did possess incredible skill in gold working, and Lake Guatavita did hold a fortune in gold artifacts at its bottom. In the centuries that followed, numerous attempts were made to drain the lake, with colonial governors and later modern treasure hunters using everything from slave labor to massive hydraulic siphons to reach the legendary treasure. While a significant number of pre-Columbian gold objects were indeed recovered from its muddy bed, the total haul was a fraction of the mythical city's supposed wealth. The environmental damage, however, was permanent. The true legacy of El Dorado, therefore, is not a discovered treasure, but a trail of destruction and a map drawn in blood. The conquistadors' desperate search, launched from their coastal footholds and pushing into the heart of the continent, inadvertently led to the European exploration and mapping of the Amazon basin, the Orinoco, and the countless river systems that vein South America. They were drawn by a mirage, a shimmering phantom of a city that never was, but in their futile pursuit, they unlocked the geography of an entire continent, all while leaving a path of cultural devastation and shattered lives in their wake. The Gilded Man was real, but the City of Gold was a fever dream, a fantasy of avarice that cost countless lives and forever altered the course of history, proving that sometimes the most powerful forces driving exploration are not stars or compasses, but the glittering, dangerous illusions we create for ourselves. But our next mystery leaves the grand stage of empires and treasure fleets for a place of elemental isolation, where the sea's power is felt not in armies or storms, but in the profound, chilling silence of an empty room. This is the legend of the Flannan Isles Lighthouse, a story of three men who vanished from one of the most remote outposts in the British Isles, leaving behind a scene of such unsettling ordinariness that it has become one of history's most enduring ghost stories. In December of 1900, the Flannan Isles, a small, desolate cluster of rocks about 20 miles west of the Scottish mainland, were home to a state-of-the-art lighthouse, a symbol of Victorian engineering and human resilience against the raw power of the North Atlantic. Its operation depended on a trio of dedicated keepers who lived in shifts, maintaining the vital beacon that warned ships away from the treacherous coastline. The three men on duty that December were Thomas Marshall, James Ducat, and Donald MacArthur, all experienced and reliable seamen. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came just after Christmas. The lighthouse tender, the vessel that brought supplies and relief crews, had been unable to make its scheduled trip for days due to a brutal, sustained storm. When the weather finally cleared enough for the ship, the Hesperus, to approach the islands on December 26th, the crew was met with an ominous sight. The lighthouse lamp was dark, no flag flew from the flagpole, and most unnervingly, no one came out to greet them. The ship's captain sounded its horn and sent up a flare but received no response. A boarding party was sent to investigate, and what they found when they entered the lighthouse has become the stuff of maritime folklore. The main gate and the outer door to the lighthouse tower were both securely locked. But the entrance door to the keeper's own quarters was unlocked and swinging open. Inside, the scene was frozen in a moment of interrupted routine. A chair was lying overturned on the floor. A table was set for a meal that had never been eaten. The clock on the wall had stopped. In the log room, the logbook was open with the final entry dated December 15th. Most tellingly, the set of oilskins, the heavy, waterproof clothing essential for any work outside, were still hanging on their pegs. Only one of the two sets was missing. Of the three men, there was not a single trace. It was as if they had simply been plucked from the face of the earth. The official government inquiry that followed could only conclude that the men had been lost in an accident, but the lack of bodies and the strange details left a vacuum perfect for speculation. The most widely accepted theory, and the one put forward by the official report, involves a tragic sequence of events born from the lighthouse's own design. The keepers were responsible for securing a crucial piece of equipment, a crane and a box that held the mooring ropes and landing apparatus on a narrow, concrete landing platform nearly 100 feet above the churning sea. The theory suggests that one of the keepers, perhaps Thomas Marshall, who had previously noted in the log the severity of the storms, went out to secure this equipment during the tremendous gales that had raged for days. The official log entries up to the last one describe storm conditions of almost biblical fury. The idea is that this first keeper was then caught by a freak colossal wave, a phenomenon well known in those waters, and was swept off the platform into the sea. Seeing his comrade in peril, a second keeper rushed out to help without even taking time to put on his oilskins, and was likewise pulled into the abyss. The third keeper, perhaps rushing out in a state of panic to see what had happened, then met the same fate. This would explain the overturned chair and the unfinished meal, a sudden, desperate dash into the storm from which none returned. It is a logical, heartbreakingly human explanation, but the very tidiness of this official story, combined with the eerie setting, has fueled more speculative and supernatural theories for over a century. Some have pointed to strange entries in the logbook just before the disappearance, where the head keeper, James Jucat, was reported to have been unusually quiet and the other keepers were said to be crying. While these reports are unverified and likely apocryphal, they have been used to support the idea of a mental break or a violent fight that led to all three men ending up in the water. Another theory, born from the paranoia of the era, suggested they were abducted by foreign spies, a fantastical idea, but one that captured the imagination of a public accustomed to tales of international intrigue. And then, of course, there are the stories rooted in the ancient folklore of the islands themselves. The Flannan Isles have long been considered a haunted, thin place by local seafarers. Old Celtic legends speak of the islands being home to spirits and a race of little people, and some have whispered that the lighthouse was built on ground that was not meant to be disturbed. Could something otherworldly have taken the three men? The enduring power of the Flannan Isles mystery lies in this perfect collision of the rational and the unknown. The official explanation is plausible, even likely, yet it fails to fully satisfy our need for a complete narrative. The overturned chair, the single set of missing oilskins, the locked outer doors but unlocked inner door. These details feel like clues in a locked room mystery set not in a mansion but on a rock in the middle of a furious ocean. The story endures because it is a profound reminder of the vulnerability of human life in the face of nature's immense, indifferent power, and because the silence the relief crew encountered was more terrifying than any ghost. It was the sound of a world carrying on, completely unchanged after its occupants had been erased without a final word or a single discoverable clue. While the Flannan Isles represent a modern mystery born from isolation and silence, our next voyage takes us back into the timeless realm of Celtic myth, to a phantom island that refused to be mapped, a place that appeared and disappeared with the whims of the ocean itself. This is the legend of High Brassel, an enchanted isle said to lie somewhere in the misty Atlantic, west of the coast of Ireland. Unlike the sunken continents of Mu or Atlantis, High Brassel was never described as a lost civilization. Instead, it was a place of eternal beauty and peace, a circular island often depicted on charts with a mysterious channel running straight through its center, as if splitting it in two. Its name comes from the Gaelic Ui Bresail, meaning descendants of Bresil, and it was woven into the folklore of Western Ireland for centuries. The island was said to be perpetually shrouded in a dense, impenetrable mist, a veil that lifted for just one single day every 7 years. On that day, it would become visible on the horizon, a green, tantalizing promise of a world just beyond reach. But any sailor who tried to land would find it impossible to make shore, the island fading back into its cloak of fog and leaving them with only a haunting memory. This was not just a fireside story. For centuries, cartographers treated High Brassel as a real geographical location. From the 14th century onward, it began appearing on navigational charts, plotted with surprising consistency to the west of Ireland. Maps by renowned cartographers like the Venetian Angelino Dulcet in the 1340s and the Catalan Atlas of 1375 all include it, a solid, circular landmass sitting in the open ocean. Its persistence on these maps speaks to a time when the line between explored fact and legendary rumor was beautifully and dangerously blurred. Mapmakers, unwilling to leave blank spaces on their charts, would often fill the unknown with the tales of sailors, and the story of High Brassel was too compelling to ignore. This cartographic legitimacy inevitably spurred real-world exploration. The potential rewards for finding a new land so close to Europe were immense, both in terms of prestige and the possibility of untapped resources. The most famous expedition launched in search of this phantom was led by the Anglo-Italian explorer John Cabot in 1497. Fresh from his own voyage to the North American coast, Cabot became captivated by the stories of High Brassel and secured backing from King Henry VII of England for a second voyage, with the explicit goal of finding the island and claiming it for the crown. He set sail with a fleet of 5 ships, but the venture was plagued with misfortune from the start. One ship was forced to turn back due to storm damage, and the others, including Cabot's own vessel, simply vanished. The official record states they were lost at sea, but the destination of their voyage has led to centuries of speculation that their fate is somehow tied to the very myth they were chasing. They sailed west to find a phantom, and in doing so became phantoms themselves. So, what were these seasoned sailors and mapmakers actually seeing? If High Brassel was not a real island, what natural phenomena could have created such a persistent and convincing illusion? One of the most compelling explanations lies in the rich fishing grounds known as the Grand Banks of Newfoundland. This vast underwater plateau, stretching southeast of the island of Newfoundland, is where the cold Labrador Current collides with the warm Gulf Stream, creating an upwelling of nutrients that supports an incredible abundance of marine life. The water over the banks is relatively shallow compared to the surrounding abyssal plains, and when conditions are right, the interplay of light and mist can play extraordinary tricks on the human eye. The sheer density of birds flocking to the area, the change in water color, and the persistent fog banks could have given early Irish monks or Basque fishermen the distinct impression of land lying just beyond the horizon. A sailor returning from a long voyage to the Grand Banks might easily have described a land he never set foot on, a story that then grew and transformed into the enchanted Isle of High Brassel over countless retellings. An even more potent explanation for the specific vision of a hovering, ephemeral island is a complex optical illusion known as the Fata Morgana. This mirage, named after the Arthurian sorceress Morgan Le Fay due to its fairy tale quality, occurs when light rays bend as they pass through air layers of different temperatures and densities. This bending or refraction can take a distant, real object like a sea stack, a small island, or even the edge of a fog bank and distort it dramatically. A Fata Morgana can compress and stretch an object, creating towering, fantastical silhouettes that appear to float above the water. It can elaborate on a simple shape, turning it into a complex cityscape with spires and castles. For a weary sailor on a medieval vessel staring for weeks into an empty horizon, the sudden appearance of a floating, verdant island created by a Fata Morgana would have been a breathtaking and utterly convincing vision. It would explain why the island was only visible on certain days when the atmospheric conditions were perfect, and why it always remained frustratingly out of reach, dissolving into nothingness as the ship drew near. The legend of High Brassel, therefore, stands as a powerful testament to the intersection of human perception and the natural world. It was a story born from the marriage of genuine navigational hazard, the awe-inspiring power of atmospheric physics, and the deep-seated human need to believe that just beyond the known world, a place of perfection and mystery awaits. The island has long since vanished from our maps, but its story remains, a ghostly echo of an age when the ocean's greatest secrets were not what lay beneath the waves, but what might appear for just a moment upon their surface. But while the phantom island of High Brassel was a product of mist and mirage, Our next legend emerges from the very bedrock of faith, a city whose story is so central to a civilization that its physical discovery would rewrite our understanding of ancient history. We journey now to the world of Indian mythology, to the glorious and sunken city of Dwarka. In the great Hindu epic, the Mahabharata, Dwarka is not just a city, it is a divine fortress, a celestial capital raised from the ocean itself by the god Krishna. The legend tells us that Krishna, to protect his people from a relentless enemy, requested a parcel of land from the sea god. In response, the ocean receded, and the city of Dwarka, meaning the gateway or the door to heaven, was built. It is described in breathtaking detail, a magnificent metropolis of opulent palaces, wide boulevards, and sophisticated infrastructure, protected by massive walls and moats, a city so resplendent it seemed to float upon the waves. For generations, it stood as a beacon of righteousness and power, the seat of Krishna's kingdom. Yet, this golden age was not to last. The epic narrates that following the great Kurukshetra war and the subsequent departure of Krishna from the mortal world, the ocean, which had once given way, returned with a vengeance. The city of Dwarka was swallowed by the sea, vanishing beneath the waves as if it had never been, leaving only a memory preserved in sacred texts and devotional songs. For thousands of years, this story was regarded as just that, a powerful religious allegory, a symbolic tale of the transient nature of the material world. That is, until the waters off the modern Indian coast began to yield their secrets. The transition from myth to potential reality began in earnest in the late 1980s and early 2000s, when marine archaeologists began investigating the Gulf of Combat off the coast of the modern city of Dwarka in Gujarat. Using sonar surveys, they identified startling geometric structures on the seabed. The scans revealed what appeared to be the outlines of large man-made foundations, grids of streets, and the remnants of massive walls. This was not random geology. The perfect right angles and organized layouts strongly suggested human hands at work. The archaeological community was electrified. Diving expeditions were launched to investigate these sonar targets, and what they brought up from the silt and sand was even more compelling. From the depths, divers recovered a treasure trove of artifacts that seemed to anchor the legend in physical evidence. They found perfectly recognizable pottery shards, some with inscriptions, along with stone tools, beads, and even human remains. Most strikingly, they retrieved large stone blocks, some with holes that suggested they were used as anchors for moored ships, pointing to the existence of an ancient, advanced harbor. The most sensational claims came from the analysis of these finds. Some researchers proposed that the artifacts and structures dated back an astonishing 9,500 years, a time frame that, if accurate, would push the origins of complex urban civilization in India back thousands of years earlier than previously accepted by mainstream archaeology, potentially placing it alongside the very earliest known civilizations in Mesopotamia. This timeline, however, is the subject of intense and ongoing debate within the scientific community. The primary method used for dating, known as thermoluminescence, which measures the last time certain materials were exposed to heat or sunlight, provided these remarkably early dates. Critics, however, point to significant challenges. The site in the Gulf of Combat is located in an area with extremely strong tidal currents, which constantly churn the seabed. This means that artifacts from many different time periods could have been mixed together, making it difficult to say with certainty that the stone structures belong to the same era as the oldest pottery fragments. Some geologists have also suggested that the sonar images could be interpreted as natural rock formations, known as beach rock, that can fracture in surprisingly regular patterns. Despite these controversies, the discoveries have ignited a firestorm of interest and national pride. For many, the underwater structures are not just an archaeological site. They are a vindication of a cultural memory, a tangible link to a sacred past that was long thought to be purely mythological. The idea that the Mahabharata was not merely a poetic epic but a historical chronicle, preserving the memory of a real, technologically advanced society that was lost to a catastrophic rise in sea levels at the end of the last ice age, is a paradigm-shifting possibility. The legend of Dwarka, therefore, exists in a fascinating space between faith and science. It challenges us to reconsider the boundaries of history and myth, suggesting that the stories passed down through millennia may contain a kernel of profound truth, a memory of a glorious city that now lies silent beneath the waves, waiting for us to fully understand its sunken secrets. From the silent stones of ancient Dwarka, we now leap forward into the modern era, where steel hulls and steam power were supposed to have conquered the sea's ancient mysteries. Yet in March of 1918, at the height of the First World War, the ocean demonstrated that its capacity for swallowing entire worlds was undiminished. This is the chilling story of the USS Cyclops, a disappearance so immense and complete that it remains the single greatest non-combat loss of life in the entire history of the United States Navy. The Cyclops was a colossal vessel for its time, a 540-foot-long Navy collier tasked with the vital duty of supplying coal to the American fleet. Its very design was unique, featuring an unusual system of rotating, self-unloading booms and a long, flat-sided hull that some sailors quietly considered unstable, especially when fully loaded. In February of 1918, the Cyclops departed from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, on what should have been a routine run back to the port of Baltimore. Its cargo, however, was far from ordinary. The ship's cavernous holds were filled with 10,000 tons of manganese ore, an incredibly dense and heavy material used in steel production. This immense weight would have made the vessel sit very low in the water, significantly altering its center of gravity and making it potentially sluggish and unresponsive in heavy seas. The Cyclops made one last stop in Barbados on March 3rd, and it was here that a final, mundane report was filed. After leaving that Caribbean port, the ship and the 309 souls aboard, crew and passengers alike, simply sailed into oblivion. No distress signal was ever received. No wreckage was ever conclusively identified. The massive collier, one of the largest ships in the Navy's auxiliary fleet, had vanished without a trace somewhere in the notoriously unpredictable waters of the Atlantic, an area that would later become infamous as the Bermuda Triangle. The immediate and most urgent theory, given the ongoing war, was enemy action. Could a German U-boat have intercepted and sunk the Cyclops? The German naval archives, examined after the war, contained no record of any U-boat attack on a vessel matching the Cyclops' description or location in that time frame. Furthermore, a submarine attack would almost certainly have generated some kind of radio distress call from the Cyclops' operators. The ship's log would have noted the sighting of an enemy vessel, and the act of surfacing to attack such a large ship would have been witnessed. The complete absence of any such communication points away from a hostile encounter. A more plausible and perhaps more terrifying explanation lies in the ship's own structure and its heavy, shifting cargo. The Cyclops' unique design, with its long, flat sides and the massive weight of manganese ore, made it vulnerable to a phenomenon known as structural failure. Manganese ore is particularly hazardous when wet. If seawater were to leak into the holds, the cargo could potentially turn into a thick, sludge-like slurry. In a storm, this slurry could shift suddenly and violently to one side of the ship. This is a maritime nightmare known as a free surface effect, where a liquid cargo's movement can create an uncontrollable list. A ship caught in this situation can capsize in a matter of minutes, far too quickly for anyone to reach the radio room and send a call for help. This theory is given considerable weight by the known behavior of the Cyclops' commander, Lieutenant Commander George Worley. Worley was a merchant marine officer who had been commissioned into the Navy, and some accounts suggest he was a strict, perhaps overly confident disciplinarian. There were reports from its final port call that the ship was already listing slightly, a concern that may or may not have been properly addressed. If a structural weakness in the hull, perhaps at a welded seam, gave way under the immense strain of the oar and the pounding of Atlantic waves, the ship could have literally broken in two, sinking so rapidly that it left no time for escape or communication. The profound mystery is deepened by the sheer scale of the loss: 309 people. To have a vessel of that size, with a population larger than many small towns, simply erased from existence is a concept that defies easy comprehension. The official Navy investigation concluded with the stark, unsatisfying phrase: "The disappearance of this ship has been one of the most baffling mysteries in the annals of the Navy, and all attempts to locate her have proved unsuccessful." The loss of the USS Cyclops stands as a stark monument to the limits of human technology and understanding. It is a reminder that even in an age of steel and steam, the ocean holds the ultimate card, capable of absorbing a giant and its entire human complement into a silence that has now lasted for over a century. The sea kept its secret, leaving only a haunting question mark on a map and a legacy of sorrow that remains palpable to this day. But now we shift our gaze from the cold, silent depths of the Atlantic to the brilliant, life-giving rays of the Egyptian sun, to a legend not of human explorers, but of a god whose daily voyage defined the very rhythm of existence. This is the story of the sun god Ra and his two magnificent barks, a celestial journey that formed the bedrock of ancient Egyptian faith and cosmology. Imagine the world as the Egyptians saw it. Each dawn was not a simple astronomical event. It was a moment of profound cosmic triumph. They believed the sun god Ra embarked on a perpetual, dangerous voyage across the sky in a majestic vessel known as the Manjet, the day bark. This journey represented Ma'at, the fundamental principle of order, truth, and justice, holding back the ever-present forces of chaos and darkness. As the blazing sun crossed the heavens, it brought light, warmth, and life to the world, a direct result of Ra's successful navigation. But sunset was not the end. It was merely the transition to the voyage's most perilous leg. As the sun disappeared below the western horizon, the Egyptians believed Ra transferred from his day bark to a second, equally magnificent vessel called the Mesektet, the night bark. This ship then carried him through the 12 hours of the night, which corresponded to the 12 regions of the underworld, the Juwat. This was no peaceful cruise. The Juwat was a terrifying, watery abyss filled with demons, serpents, and the ultimate embodiment of chaos, the great serpent Apep, or Apophis. Each night, a monumental battle ensued. Ra and his crew of gods, including Set, the god of violence who defended the bark, and Mat herself, who stood at the prow, had to fight off Apep's attacks to ensure the sun could be reborn at dawn. The success of this nightly journey was not guaranteed. It required ritual, magic, and the unwavering support of the gods. If Ra failed, the sun would never rise again, and chaos would consume the world. This myth was far more than a charming story to explain the sunrise. It was the central organizing principle of Egyptian society. The pharaoh was considered the son of Ra, his earthly representative. It was his divine duty to perform the temple's rituals that aided Ra in his battle against Apep, effectively maintaining the cosmic order and preventing the world from plunging into oblivion. The entire Egyptian state, with its immense resources poured into temple complexes and priestly hierarchies, was, in a very real sense, a machine designed to ensure the sun god's bark completed its journey each and every day. This celestial belief, however, had a breathtakingly tangible counterpart right here on Earth. For the ancient Egyptians, this cosmic voyage was not just for the gods. It was the model for the ultimate human journey, the journey of the soul after death. Just as Ra traveled through the darkness of the Juwat to be reborn, so too would the soul of the pharaoh, and eventually every Egyptian, need to navigate the underworld to reach eternal life. And what better way to undertake that perilous journey than with the proper transportation? This profound belief is why, in 1954, archaeologists made one of the most spectacular discoveries in all of Egyptology. After digging into a long sealed pit at the southern foot of the Great Pyramid of Giza, they uncovered not a tomb but a fleet. There, disassembled into 1,224 individual pieces of cedar wood and acacia, lay the perfectly preserved solar bark of Pharaoh Khufu. This was not a model or a symbolic offering. It was a full-sized, seaworthy ship, 143 feet long, a masterpiece of ancient shipbuilding. Its discovery was a revelation. The vessel's design was incredibly sophisticated, with a sleek, curved hull, an enclosed cabin, and oars that were clearly meant for propulsion, not just ceremony. This was the pharaoh's own Mesektet, his personal night bark, buried right next to his pyramid to be used in the afterlife. The meticulous care taken in its burial, the stones fitted perfectly to protect the wood for millennia, speaks volumes about its importance. Khufu was not just being buried with treasure, he was being equipped with the single most vital vehicle for his eternal soul. After his mortal death, his spirit would board this ship, just as Ra boarded his, and begin the perilous journey through the Duat. He would face the same demons, battle the same serpent Apep, and with the help of the spells from the pyramid texts, he would navigate these dangers to be reunited with Ra and rise again, reborn as a star in the sky, eternal and unchanging. The Khufu ship, painstakingly reassembled and now housed in its own museum beside the Great Pyramid, is more than an archaeological artifact. It is the physical manifestation of an entire civilization's hope for eternity. It connects the grandest of cosmic myths to the most personal of human aspirations. It represents the ultimate sea voyage, one that every soul hoped to make, a journey from the land of the living across the dark waters of death and into the unending light of the afterlife. In this sacred vessel, the line between myth and reality, between the divine and the mortal, completely dissolves, leaving us with a stunning testament to the human desire to conquer not just the seas of this world, but the great unknown ocean of what lies beyond. Yet as grand as the celestial voyage of Ra was, the Victorian era produced its own epic quest for a terrestrial paradise, a practical grail that promised global dominance for the British Empire, the Northwest Passage. This was not a myth, but a tantalizingly real shortcut, a sea route across the top of North America that would link the Atlantic and Pacific, slashing the journey time to the riches of the Orient. For centuries, it had been the ultimate prize for Arctic explorers, a labyrinth of ice-choked channels that had broken countless ships and men. Then, in 1845, the British Admiralty launched what they believed would be the final, triumphant expedition. They equipped it with the most advanced technology on Earth and placed it under the command of a seasoned, if aging, officer, Sir John Franklin. His two ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, were not ordinary vessels. They were legendary bomb ships, veterans of the Napoleonic Wars, built with incredibly strong, thick oak hulls designed to withstand the recoil of massive mortars. For their Arctic mission, they were transformed into the 19th century equivalents of spaceships. Their bows were sheathed in iron plate to smash through ice, and they were fitted with revolutionary steam-driven screw propellers, allowing them to maneuver when the winds failed. They even had early central heating systems and vast libraries, representing the pinnacle of imperial confidence. When they sailed from Greenland in July 1845, witnessed by a whaling ship, they were 129 men strong, provisioned for 3 years with tinned food, fine china, and silver cutlery. Then the Arctic swallowed them whole. For 2 years there was nothing but silence. The first trickle of clues came not from the British, but from the Inuit, the indigenous people of the Arctic, who had watched the great ships with curiosity. They told stories of white men, weak and starving, dragging boats across the ice, and of camps where the ground was littered with human bones. These accounts were initially dismissed by the Admiralty as the fanciful tales of savages. But as search party after search party failed to find the ships, the grim truth began to emerge. On a desolate beach on King William Island, a stone cairn was discovered. Inside was a single, fateful note dated 25 April 1848. It revealed that Franklin had died 11 months earlier, in June 1847, and that the ships had been trapped in the ice for a year and a half. The surviving 105 men, led by Captain Francis Crozier, had abandoned the vessels to try and walk to salvation overland. The final, horrifying line, scribbled in the margin, stated they were setting out for Back's Fish River the next day. None would survive. The trail of relics left behind by the retreating crews told a story of a slow, agonizing death. Sledges were found loaded with absurdly heavy items: silver plate, a writing desk, silk handkerchiefs, evidence of men clinging to civilization even as their bodies failed them. Cut marks on human bones, discovered much later by modern forensic anthropologists, confirmed the darkest of the Inuit stories. The men had resorted to cannibalism in a final, desperate attempt to stay alive. It was a conclusion so shocking to Victorian society that it scandalized Franklin's widow and the British public, who preferred to remember their heroes as martyrs to science and empire, not as victims of their own failed planning. For over a century and a half, the final resting places of Erebus and Terror remained one of the Arctic's most guarded secrets. Then, in a stunning reversal aided by a combination of persistent Inuit oral history and cutting-edge technology, the ocean gave up its ghost. In 2014, a Parks Canada team, using sonar towed by an icebreaker, located the wreck of HMS Erebus at the bottom of Queen Maud Gulf. The ship was found upright and in a state of near-perfect preservation, the cold, dark water acting as a perfect time capsule. 2 years later, the Terror was discovered in Terror Bay, further south, its name eerily prophetic. The condition of the wrecks was breathtaking. Divers exploring the interiors found the officers' cabins still contained their furniture, with plates and scientific instruments resting on shelves as if waiting for the crew to return. The discovery of the ships has not provided simple answers, but has instead deepened the mystery. Why were the two ships found so far apart? How did they sink? The evidence suggests the Inuit may have been right all along in their accounts that at least one of the ships was remanned and sailed for some distance before finally succumbing. The ongoing archaeological work is a delicate process of peeling back layers of silt and history, with each new artifact, a lieutenant's epaulette, a sealed writing box, a perfectly preserved thermometer, adding another sentence to the final, tragic chapter of the Franklin expedition. The story of Erebus and Terror is more than a tale of exploration gone wrong. It is a profound lesson in hubris. It was the belief that the latest technology could conquer one of the planet's most hostile environments, and the tragic failure to listen to the people who actually understood that environment. The ships now rest in their silent, icy graves, not as trophies of conquest, but as haunting memorials to the limits of human ambition when faced with the immutable power of nature. But if the Franklin expedition represents a tangible tragedy whose wreckage we can now touch, our next legend sails out of the mist of pure folklore, a phantom that has haunted the imagination of sailors for centuries. This is the story of the Flying Dutchman, the most famous ghost ship of them all, a spectral vessel condemned to sail the world's oceans for eternity, never making port, her crew of lost souls a permanent fixture of the endless horizon. The legend, in its most classic form, tells of a Dutch merchant captain, often identified as a man named Van der Decken. He was a man of immense skill and even greater arrogance, commanding a ship on the long, perilous voyage from the Netherlands to the lucrative trading posts of the East Indies. The story goes that as he attempted to round the Cape of Good Hope, that notorious graveyard of ships at the southern tip of Africa, his vessel was met with a hurricane of unimaginable ferocity. The crew, terrified and begging him to turn back, was met with the captain's blasphemous pride. He swore a profane oath, vowing that he would round the Cape even if it took him until the day of judgment. Some versions say he challenged God himself, while others claim he made a pact with the devil. For this act of hubris, his punishment was swift and eternal. A ghostly figure appeared on the deck, and the captain was condemned by a divine curse. He and his ship, the Flying Dutchman, were doomed to forever sail the stormy seas around the Cape, never finding rest, their very appearance a dire omen of misfortune and death for any living sailor who laid eyes upon them. The historical roots of this tale are often traced to a very real and remarkable 17th century Dutch sea captain named Bernard Fock. Fock was famous for his unbelievably fast voyages between Holland and the Dutch East Indies. His speed was so extraordinary that rumors swirled he had supernatural assistance, perhaps even a pact with the devil, to explain how his ship could outpace all others. His reputation for almost preternatural seamanship and the mystery surrounding his methods provided the perfect real-world anchor for the supernatural legend to take hold. The alleged sightings of this phantom ship are a chronicle of maritime dread stretching back hundreds of years. Sailors' logs from the 18th and 19th centuries are filled with accounts of encountering a strange, glowing ship with tattered sails, moving against the wind and through storms with an impossible speed. The most famous and perhaps most credible sighting came from none other than the future King George V of England. In 1880, while serving as a 16-year-old naval cadet aboard HMS Bacchante, he and 13 other crew members logged an encounter off the coast of Australia. His diary entry describes a ghostly, red-hulled ship glowing with a strange phosphorescent light which approached them before vanishing into the night. The omen held true. The sailor who first spotted the vessel reportedly fell from the rigging and died shortly after. This testimony from a future monarch lent an air of undeniable credibility to the legend and cemented its place in popular culture. Yet, when we pull back the curtain of folklore, we find that the legend of the Flying Dutchman functions on several profound levels. On one hand, it is a perfect, terrifying metaphor for the unforgiving nature of the sea itself. The cursed captain, forever struggling against an impossible storm, embodies the futile struggle of humanity against the ocean's raw, indifferent power. He represents the ultimate price of arrogance, a warning to all sailors that no matter their skill, they are at the mercy of a force far greater than themselves. The ship's eternal voyage is the sea's eternal threat, a constant spectral reminder of the thin line between a successful journey and a watery grave. But there is also a powerful scientific explanation for these persistent sightings, one rooted in the psychology and physiology of long, arduous voyages. Sailors spending months at sea, subjected to sleep deprivation, extreme fatigue, and a monotonous diet, were highly susceptible to powerful hallucinations. Their minds, starved for stimulation, could easily project their deepest fears onto the blank canvas of the ocean. Furthermore, the specific atmospheric conditions at sea are ripe for creating complex optical illusions. The most likely culprit for the Flying Dutchman is a phenomenon known as a fata morgana. This sophisticated mirage occurs when light rays bend as they pass through layers of air at sharply different temperatures. For instance, when a layer of cold, dense air sits beneath a layer of warmer, less dense air. This bending can take a distant, real object, a ship just over the horizon, a rock formation, or even a cloud bank, and distort it dramatically. A fata morgana can compress, stretch, and elevate this object, creating a towering, shimmering, and often inverted image that appears to float above the water. To a superstitious and exhausted crew, a fata morgana transforming a distant merchant vessel into a hovering, ghostly apparition with tattered sails would have been a terrifyingly convincing vision of the Dutchman himself. The legend's enduring power, therefore, lies in this perfect fusion of human psychology and natural science. It is a story born from the very real dangers of the sea, the understandable fears of those who worked upon it, and the astonishing tricks that light and atmosphere can play on the human eye. The Flying Dutchman sails on not as a single ghost ship, but as a timeless archetype, a spectral warning born from the whispers of tired sailors and the shimmering, deceptive beauty of the sea itself. But the legendary treasures of the Spanish Main were not myths whispered in taverns. They were tangible, staggering fortunes in gold and silver, hauled from the mines of a conquered new world and loaded onto mighty galleons for the perilous journey home. For over 2 centuries, the Spanish Empire operated a meticulously organized, yet incredibly vulnerable, system known as the Carrera de Indias, the treasure fleet. Every year, 2 massive convoys would gather in the Caribbean. The floater would sail for Veracruz to collect the riches of Mexico, while the galeons would head to Portobelo to receive the wealth of Peru, transported across the Isthmus of Panama by mule train. These were not just a few ships, they were floating cities of wood and sail, forming an armada of sometimes 60 vessels or more, carrying not only the king's royal fifth of all treasure, but also the private fortunes of merchants and colonists. Picture these great ships, their holds packed to the beams with heavy chests of minted silver pieces of 8, solid gold ingots, and exotic goods like indigo, cochineal, and vanilla. The sheer scale of wealth is almost incomprehensible. In today's value, a single successful fleet could be carrying the equivalent of billions of dollars. This made them the most tempting targets for pirates and privateers, but their most relentless enemy was always the sea itself. The route home was a deadly gauntlet. After loading their cargo in the relative safety of the Caribbean, the fleets would sail north, riding the powerful Gulf Stream up the coast of Florida before turning east to catch the prevailing westerlies back to Spain. This stretch of the Florida coast, with its shallow reefs, shifting sandbars, and sudden, violent hurricanes, became one of the richest shipwreck graveyards in the world. One of the most catastrophic losses in this entire enterprise was the terrible fate of the 1715 treasure fleet. In the summer of that year, a convoy of 11 ships, laden with an immense cargo of silver, gold, and jewels from the Spanish colonies, set sail from Havana, Cuba. The fleet's commander, Captain General Don Juan Esteban de Ubilla, was likely anxious. It was late in the hurricane season. Just days into their voyage on July 31, 1715, they were overtaken by a monstrous hurricane off the east coast of Florida. The storm was of such ferocity that it utterly destroyed the entire fleet. 10 of the 11 ships were dashed to pieces on the reefs between present-day Cape Canaveral and Fort Pierce, sending their fabulous cargoes and most of their 2,000 crew and passengers to the bottom. The devastation was so complete that when salvage ships from Havana arrived, they found the coastline littered with wreckage and bodies. The Spanish mounted a massive recovery effort for years, using Indian slaves to dive and recover what they could. But the sheer power of the storm had scattered the treasure across the ocean floor, and a vast fortune remained lost, buried under sand and time. For centuries, the wreck sites slept, their exact locations forgotten, until the modern era of treasure hunting began. The story of the 1715 fleet's rediscovery is intertwined with the rise of salvors like Kip Wagner, who in the 1960s used primitive metal detectors and sheer determination to locate several of the wreaths, recovering millions of dollars in gold and silver and proving that the legendary hoard was still there for the finding. But if the 1715 fleet represents a collective tragedy, the story of one particular ship, the Nuestra Señora de Atocha, stands as the ultimate prize, a singular vessel whose discovery became the stuff of legend. The Atocha was a heavily armed galleon serving as the almirante, or rear guard ship, for the 1622 treasure fleet. When it left Havana, it was carrying a mind-boggling fortune, a veritable mountain of wealth intended to finance the Spanish crown's wars in Europe. Its manifest listed 138,000 silver coins, over 900 silver ingots, 161 gold bars and discs, and a stunning collection of Colombian emeralds, including one piece described as the size of a goose egg. Just one day after setting sail, the fleet was struck by a powerful hurricane. The Atocha was driven onto a reef and sank instantly, taking all but 5 of its 265 passengers and crew and its entire treasure down in 40 feet of water. The Spanish located the wreck but found the main treasure hold buried under sand and protected by a formidable coral reef. They tried to blast it open with explosives but failed, and the site was abandoned, its location fading into obscurity. The Atocha became the holy grail of shipwreck hunting, a siren song that lured many, but it was the indomitable Mel Fisher who would dedicate his life to its pursuit. For 16 long years, Fisher and his crew, operating under the motto, "Today's the day," combed the waters off the Florida Keys. They faced immense hardship, financial ruin, equipment failures, and tragically, the deaths of his son and daughter-in-law when a salvage boat capsized. The search was a monumental test of endurance and faith. Then, on July 20th, 1985, the radio crackled with the most famous message in the history of underwater archaeology. Fisher's son Kane radioed in, shouting, "Put away the charts, we've found the main pile." What they had discovered was beyond anyone's wildest dreams. The motherlode of the Atocha contained a king's ransom. Divers brought up solid gold bars stacked like firewood, chests overflowing with silver pieces of 8, exquisite gold chains weighing over 6 pounds, and that legendary cache of uncut emeralds from the Muso mines of Colombia. The total value of the recovered treasure was estimated to be around $400 million. Yet, the discovery of such immense wealth on the seabed did not come without its own modern-day battles, fought not with cannons but with lawyers in courtrooms. The moment Fisher found the Atocha, he was thrust into a monumental legal war with the state of Florida and the federal government, all of whom laid claim to the treasure. The case went all the way to the United States Supreme Court, which ultimately ruled in Fisher's favor, granting him full rights to the wreck and its contents based on the legal principle of finders keepers, applied to abandoned shipwrecks in international waters. This landmark decision, however, sparked a new era of ethical and legal debate. Who truly owns the past? Is it the modern descendant of the nation that lost it, the commercial salver who risked life and fortune to find it? Or is it humanity itself, with the artifacts belonging in a museum for all to see? Mel Fisher ultimately established his own museum in Key West to display the treasures, but the legal precedent he set continues to influence maritime salvage law to this day, creating a complex web of claims and counterclaims for every new wreck discovered. The sunken treasures of the Spanish Main are therefore more than just lost gold. They are time capsules from the Age of Empire, each silver coin and gold bar a silent witness to the brutal conquest of the Americas, the immense human cost of colonialism, and the timeless, dangerous allure of the sea. They represent a dream that drove men to cross oceans and a nightmare that consumed them on the journey home, leaving their fabulous fortunes to sleep beneath the waves, waiting for the stubborn dreamers who would one day answer their siren call. Moving from the grand narratives of lost continents and phantom fleets, we arrive at a mystery that is smaller in scale but no less perplexing, a fleeting encounter that captures the profound uncertainty of navigating a world still largely unexplored. This is the strange case of the French corvette Bayonnaise, and the phantom rocks that appeared were meticulously documented and then vanished from the face of the earth. In the middle of the 19th century, the age of sail was giving way to steam, but the world's oceans still held vast, blank spaces on even the most advanced charts. It was into this realm of the unknown that the French naval corvette Bayonnaise sailed in the year 1855, on a routine passage across the vast emptiness of the Central Pacific. The crew's daily routine of taking soundings and scanning the horizon was suddenly interrupted by a startling sight. There, where the charts showed only open ocean, a cluster of dark rocks broke the surface. But these were no ordinary shoals. Witnesses from the deck reported seeing columns of water and smoke erupting from among the rocks, a clear indication of some kind of violent subterranean activity. The captain, recognizing the immediate danger to navigation and the scientific importance of the discovery, acted with methodical precision. He took careful bearings, noting the position of this newfound hazard. The coordinates were logged, the feature was given a name, the Bayonnaise Rocks, and in due course the discovery was reported to the French Hydrographic Office. The rocks were officially added to the maritime charts of the Pacific, a new fixed point in a fluid world, a warning to all future vessels to steer clear of this uncharted volcanic outcrop. And then the rocks simply disappeared. Within a few years, other ships armed with the new French charts sailed directly to the recorded location. They found nothing. Not a single dark peak, not a wisp of steam, not a break in the endless rolling swells. The sea was as deep and empty as it had been before the Bayonnaise's voyage. Expeditions were sent specifically to investigate the discrepancy, scouring the area with every tool at their disposal, but the Bayonnaise rocks had been utterly erased. This presented a monumental cartographic puzzle. A respected naval officer had made a clear, sober observation and recorded it officially, yet the evidence was gone. So, what did the crew of the Bayonnaise actually see? The most compelling and scientifically plausible theory is that they witnessed the dramatic but tragically brief birth of a volcanic island. The Pacific Ocean is ringed by the infamous Ring of Fire, a horseshoe-shaped zone of intense tectonic activity, and the area where the rocks were sighted is part of this volatile system. It is entirely possible that a submarine volcano was undergoing a period of violent eruptive activity. The smoke seen by the sailors was likely a mixture of volcanic ash and steam, while the erupting water could have been caused by superheated magma violently interacting with the cold seawater, a phenomenon known as phreatomagmatic activity. In this scenario, the Bayonnaise had the incredible luck or misfortune to sail past at the very moment this new land was being born from the ocean's depths. The rocks they charted were the temporary peak of a growing volcanic cone. However, such infant islands, built from loose volcanic cinder and ash rather than solid bedrock, are extremely vulnerable to the relentless power of the ocean. The massive, unceasing force of Pacific waves would have quickly eroded the fragile new formation, washing it away completely within months or even weeks. The island was born, charted, and then died, all before another European ship could arrive to confirm its existence. It was a geological event witnessed only once, a mountain that lived and died in the span of a single human season, leaving only a ghost on a map. Another, more prosaic theory suggests a simple case of misidentification, though one born from the very real perils of the sea. Could the erupting water and smoke have been a large whale, or more likely a pod of whales? The spout of a large baleen whale, especially seen from a distance and in certain light conditions, can indeed resemble a column of spray or smoke. If a pod was engaged in vigorous activity, it could potentially create the illusion of multiple plumes. While this might explain the eruption, it hardly accounts for the sighting of the rocks themselves. A more chilling possibility is that the crew saw the final, gaseous death throes of a dying whale, a morbid event that could produce both a visible carcass and a release of internal gases that might be mistaken for smoke, creating a single, macabre spectacle that was entirely misinterpreted. The true legacy of the Bayonnaise rocks lies not in solving the mystery, but in what it reveals about the nature of exploration itself. Before satellite imagery and global positioning systems, the map of the world was a living, changing document shaped by human testimony that was sometimes fallible and always subject to the interpretation of a single observer. A captain's log entry was the primary data point, and his reputation was the guarantee of its accuracy. The case of the Bayonnaise rocks represents the absolute limit of this system. Here was a well-documented observation that later technology proved false, creating a paradox that could only be resolved by understanding the dynamic, unpredictable planet they were trying to chart. These phantom islands and vanishing rocks were the cartographic ghosts of their era, reminders that the sea was not a static blue plain, but a living, breathing entity capable of creating and destroying land right before their eyes. The story endures as a perfect symbol of that fleeting moment in history when the world was almost fully discovered, but not yet fully known, a time when a ship could still sail into the unknown and return with a story that no one would ever be able to verify again. And so we arrive at our final legend, a mystery that takes us back to the very source of many Western tales of distant riches, the pages of the Old Testament. Here we find not a lost continent or a phantom island, but a golden kingdom known as Ophir, a place whose name became synonymous with almost unimaginable wealth. The primary source of its fame comes from the first book of Kings, detailing the reign of the wise King Solomon in the 10th century BCE. It describes a joint maritime venture between Solomon and his ally, Hiram, the king of the Phoenician city-state of Tyre. Together, they built a fleet of ships not in the Red Sea, but at a port called Ezion-Geber on the Gulf of Aqaba. This fleet, crewed by the most experienced Phoenician sailors, the masters of the ancient Mediterranean, set sail for this fabled Ophir. When they returned, the scale of their cargo was staggering. The Bible meticulously records that they brought back 420 talents of gold. To put that into a modern perspective, that's roughly 25 tons of pure gold. Beyond the gold, they carried precious stones and a unique commodity, a huge quantity of almug wood, a fragrant, high-quality timber never seen before in Israel, which Solomon used to make pillars for his temple and his own palace, as well as harps and lyres for his musicians. This was not a one-time expedition. Subsequent voyages were undertaken, with one journey said to have taken 3 years, suggesting an incredibly long and complex trade route to a destination far beyond the regular horizons of the ancient world. The central, captivating question is simple and profound. Where on earth was Ophir? The biblical text provides frustratingly few geographical clues, speaking only of a distant land reached by a long sea voyage. This lack of concrete detail has created a vacuum that historians, archaeologists, and treasure hunters have been trying to fill for over 2 millennia, leading to a spectacular array of theories that span the entire globe. One of the most persistent schools of thought places Ophir somewhere on the Indian subcontinent. Proponents of this theory point to the specific goods mentioned. While gold was found in many places, the almug wood is often identified as sandalwood, a fragrant timber highly prized in the ancient world that is native to India and Sri Lanka. Furthermore, the 3-year duration of the round trip could logically account for a voyage from the Red Sea, down the coast of Arabia, across the Indian Ocean to India, and then the long journey back, a trip entirely within the capabilities of Phoenician seafarers who were known to have established trade networks deep into the Indian Ocean. This theory presents Ophir not as a single city, but as a region, a general term for the wealthy trading ports of ancient India. Another compelling set of theories points due south to the riches of Africa. The ancient kingdom of Punt, which we encountered with Hatshepsut, was a known source of gold and exotic goods for the Egyptians, and it's plausible that the Phoenicians, through their close contact with Egypt, learned of these riches and sought them out for themselves. Even more tantalizing is the connection to southern Africa. In the modern era, the ruins of Great Zimbabwe, a massive stone city in the interior of Zimbabwe, sparked a wave of speculation. When European explorers first encountered these impressive stone structures in the 19th century, they refused to believe they were built by indigenous Africans. Instead, they concocted romantic theories that this was the biblical Ophir, or a colony of Ophir, built to manage the gold mines for which the region was famous. While modern archaeology has definitively proven Great Zimbabwe was the work of a sophisticated Shona civilization centuries after Solomon, the link between African gold and the legend of Ophir remains a powerful one, suggesting that the fame of the continent's mineral wealth may have filtered north and been incorporated into these ancient stories. More speculative theories have pushed the possible location of Ophir to even more distant shores. Some have suggested it was in the Arabian Peninsula, in the land of Sheba, modern-day Yemen, which was renowned for its wealth from the incense trade. Others have looked to the Philippines and Southeast Asia, regions teeming with gold and rare hardwoods. There is even a fascinating, though highly controversial, theory that places Ophir in the Americas, suggesting that Phoenician ships capable of navigating the open Atlantic might have crossed the ocean and brought back treasures from the New World thousands of years before Columbus. This idea, while captivating, lacks any solid archaeological or textual evidence, but it speaks to the powerful allure of the Ophir story, a legend so potent that it can encompass the entire unknown world. So, was Ophir a real, single location, or is it something else entirely? Many scholars now lean toward the idea that Ophir is a composite legend. In this interpretation, Ophir was not a specific city or kingdom, but a conceptual destination. It was the ancient world's ultimate anywhere, a catch-all term for any distant, wealthy land reached by long and perilous sea voyages. The Phoenician and Israelite traders would have returned from many different journeys to many different ports in India, Africa, and Arabia, each bringing back gold, gems, and exotic goods. Over time, and in the grand poetic style of biblical chroniclers, these various successful trading partners could have been condensed into a single, mythical source of all riches, the legendary Ophir. This explanation doesn't diminish the mystery, it in fact deepens it. It transforms Ophir from a place on a map that we simply haven't found into a profound symbol of the human spirit of commerce and exploration. It represents the universal dream of a land of abundance just over the horizon, a dream that drove the first global trade networks and inspired expeditions for centuries. The lost sea route to Ophir was never a single line on a chart. It was every route. It was the collective memory of every successful voyage, every dangerous journey that returned with a hull full of wonder. The true treasure of Ophir was not the 25 tons of gold, but the story itself. A story that proved the world was vast, filled with riches, and waiting for those brave enough to sail beyond the rising sun in search of it. This enduring mystery of Ophir did not fade with the ancients. It simply passed from the hands of sailors and kings to those of scholars, archaeologists, and treasure hunters, all armed with new tools and an old obsession. The modern search for this golden land has been a fascinating exercise in connecting biblical text with physical evidence, a quest that has led researchers down some of the most unexpected paths in the world. Perhaps no theory better illustrates the powerful, and sometimes misguided, allure of Ophir than the 19th century fascination with the ruins of Great Zimbabwe. When European explorers like Karl Marx first laid eyes on the magnificent, sprawling stone complexes in the 1870s, they were utterly baffled. The scale was immense, with massive, dry stone walls rising over 30 feet high, forming enclosures and a striking conical tower, all demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of engineering and state organization. The prevailing racial prejudices of the colonial era made it impossible for these explorers to believe that the local Shona people could have built such a civilization. Instead, they immediately reached for a biblical explanation, convinced they had found the very mines and stronghold of King Solomon. March famously and erroneously declared one of the soapstone carvings of a bird to be a representation of the biblical phoenix, and he was certain he had located the land of Ophir itself, a place built by Phoenicians for Solomon to access the legendary gold of the region. This theory, though born from colonial arrogance, was not entirely baseless in its core observation. The area around Great Zimbabwe was phenomenally rich in gold, with thousands of ancient mine shafts dotting the landscape, proving that a vast and prosperous gold trade had indeed flourished there for centuries. For a time, the link between Zimbabwe and Ophir seemed compelling, a romantic solution to a 3,000-year-old puzzle. However, as proper archaeological techniques were applied in the 20th century, this elegant theory crumbled. Carbon dating of artifacts and settlement remains conclusively proved that Great Zimbabwe reached its peak between the 11th and 15th century CE, over 2,000 years after the reign of King Solomon. The civilization was definitively African, a proud achievement of the Shona people, and not a colonial outpost of a Middle Eastern empire. While this closed the door on Zimbabwe as the literal Ophir, it highlighted a profound truth. The legend of a distant, gold-rich land could easily have been inspired by the very real and ancient gold trade networks that stretched from the interior of Africa to the coast, where Phoenician ships might well have encountered its riches. With the Zimbabwe theory set aside, the search shifted to the analysis of ancient trade itself, piecing together a route from the fragments left behind in port records and cargo holds. If Ophir was a composite of real trade partners, its ingredients should be findable in the archaeological record. The key lies in the specific cargo mentioned in the Bible: the gold, the precious stones, and the enigmatic almug wood. By tracing these goods to their sources, we can begin to reverse engineer the likely voyage. The most promising evidence comes not from the Levant, but from the other end of the potential trade route. At the site of the ancient port of Sumhuram in modern-day Oman, a region historically part of the Kingdom of Sheba, archaeologists have uncovered a thriving first millennium BC trading center. Inscriptions found here detail a vibrant maritime commerce across the Indian Ocean. More tellingly, excavations have uncovered artifacts that match the biblical description of Ophir's treasures. The most significant find was a substantial collection of teak wood. Teak is not native to Arabia, it grows in India. This proves that ships from this region were indeed making the long-distance voyages to the Indian subcontinent and bringing back exotic, valuable timber, a perfect parallel for the almug wood brought back for Solomon's temple. Furthermore, the networks extended even further. Roman and Greek texts written centuries later but drawing on older knowledge describe a bustling trade for gold, spices, and gems with ports in southern India and Sri Lanka. The Tamil kingdoms of the region were famous for their pearls and gold, and sandalwood, a strong candidate for almug wood, was a major export. When you map these trade goods, Indian teak and sandalwood, African gold, Arabian incense, and Indian gems, you begin to see the outline of a vast, interconnected economic system. The fleet of Solomon and Hiram did not need to sail to one single, mythical city called Ophir. Instead, they were likely tapping into a pre-existing, complex network. Their ships would have sailed from Ezion-Geber down the Red Sea, following the coast of Arabia to its southern tip. From there, they could have caught the monsoon winds across the Indian Ocean to the ports of Gujarat or the Malabar coast in India, or perhaps even further south to Sri Lanka. At each stop, they would have traded goods, acquiring gold from one port, precious stones from another, and fragrant wood from a third. By the time they turned for home, their holds would have contained a composite treasure from a dozen different lands, a collection so magnificent that it could only be described as coming from a single, divinely blessed source, Ophir. The enduring power of Ophir, then, is not as a location to be found on a map, but as a symbol of something far greater. It represents the very human drive that fuels all exploration, the quest for the unknown and the hope for transformative wealth. For the ancient Israelites, it was a story that explained their kingdom's golden age under Solomon, a testament to their God's favor and their own reach into a wider world. For medieval cartographers, it was a blank space on the map to be filled with imagination and longing. For the colonial explorers, it was a justification for their expansion, a way to claim a glorious biblical past for a foreign land. And for us today, the search for Ophir continues in a different form. It is the quest of the marine archaeologist diving on a Roman-era shipwreck in the Indian Ocean and finding a cargo of Indian pepper. It is the work of the epigrapher painstakingly translating a Sabaean inscription that mentions a shipment of teak. It is the analysis of a geochemist, tracing the origin of a gold artifact found in Israel back to a specific mine in Nubia or Ethiopia. We are still searching for Ophir, not with a single ship, but with the collective tools of modern science, slowly and methodically reconstructing the lost trade routes that once connected the ancient world. The legend endures because the dream endures. It is the dream of a horizon that holds not an end but a beginning. The dream that just beyond the edge of the known world lies a fortune in gold, a trove of knowledge, or simply the answer to an age-old question. Ophir is the ultimate destination for that dream, a place that is always just over the next wave, forever inspiring us to build our ships, chart our courses, and set sail into the great blue unknown. And so, our voyage across these 25 enigmatic legends comes to a close, our ship returning to the safe harbor of the present, yet our minds still adrift on those ancient, whispering seas. From the sunken dream of Mu and the philosophical riddle of Atlantis, to the magnificent, abandoned treasure fleets of Zheng and the fleeting North American foothold of the Vikings at Elan's Ox Meadows, we have journeyed alongside the ghosts of explorers and the specters of their ships. We have stood on the deck of the perfectly preserved yet utterly abandoned Mary Celeste, felt the chilling silence of the Flannan Isles lighthouse, and watched the divine wind, the kamikaze, shatter the colossal ambition of Kublai Khan. We have followed the saintly faith of Brendan in his leather boat, unraveled the cryptic word left at Roanoke, and chased the glittering, illusory phantoms of El Dorado and Captain Kidd's treasure. We have seen the celestial bark of Pharaoh Khufu, built for a journey through the underworld, and traced the sunken stones of Dwarka, where myth and history collide beneath the waves. We have witnessed the Franklin expedition's tragic hubris frozen in ice, felt the dread of the eternal Flying Dutchman, and marveled at the real-world treasures of the Spanish Main recovered from their watery graves. From the phantom rocks of the Bayonets that appeared and vanished to the golden, composite legend of Ophir that encompasses the entire ancient world, these stories form a grand tapestry woven with threads of human courage, staggering curiosity, and an insatiable thirst for what lies beyond the map's edge. They are not merely tales of loss, but profound testaments to our spirit. They speak of our drive to build, to explore, and to understand, even when faced with the immense, indifferent power of the ocean. These legends remind us that the greatest mysteries are not always about what was lost, but about the unyielding force that compelled us to venture out in the first place. They are echoes of our own innate desire to push boundaries, to answer the siren call of the horizon, and to believe that incredible wonders, whether cities of gold or gateways to the gods, are still waiting to be found. The sea keeps its secrets well, but in doing so, it forever fuels our imagination. Now the compass turns to you. Which of these incredible stories resonated most deeply? Was it the haunting abandonment of the Mary Celeste, the triumphant yet tragic proof of the Viking sagas, or the sunken promise of a pharaoh's afterlife journey? The ocean of history is vast, and these 25 legends are but a few of its countless mysteries. Share your own favorite maritime enigma in the comments below. We would love to hear which tales capture your imagination. And if you are eager for more journeys into the depths of the past, to uncover more secrets lost to time and tide, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you do not miss our next expedition into the unknown. Until then, keep your eyes